Okay, I am live. Let me see what I can do here actually. Add moderator. Yeah, just added a moderator. I'm gonna wait for people to show up. And then after we get rolling a little bit, I'm gonna turn off the comments. You guys can still jabber with each other, but that way I can concentrate on what I'm doing instead of getting super sidetracked. You know what's really, really funny is how nervous I am about this. It's so funny because I'm like, I do this stuff all the time. Right, like I've done hundreds of hours of live video and videos for like teaching herbalism and stuff, and I'm like, I'm so nervous. But you know, it'll be all right, and as long as I get that out there, it takes away like the nervousness power. So what's gonna happen is I'm gonna do the live class, I'm gonna do all of my jabbering, and then I'm going to turn the comments back on so that I can see them, and I'll go over some of your common questions. So I'm hoping I have one admin here, Sarah Golden, that's why she has the little wrench next to her name, and then hopefully my other one will join here pretty soon. And for those rewatching, this is a live stream and so I am seeing people comment and stuff like that. I'm not just talking to myself, but that's one of the reasons that I'm going to shut those off. That way I can just keep steady with what I'm talking about, and then I'll turn them back on, and when I read your question, I'll read it out loud so people know what the hell I'm talking about. Okay. So I'm going to turn this off. I'm going to hide all. Okay, so I think you guys can still see your each other's chat, but I can't. That way I'm not like a magpie all over the place, right? Okay, so we're here today to learn how to make an herbal infused oil. Now, one thing I will say is a lot of folks were asking me what they needed to have on hand to follow along, and it's not really that type of class in the way that we're not making something specific so much as I'm going to go over all of like the different herbs you can use, how to pick this stuff, what we're doing. It really is pretty simple. I'm just going to give you some layers for this. You can take notes if you want, but also I will be saving this so you can rewatch it again, and then I'll be putting it on my Instagram as well, just so you can kind of like keep coming back for reference and stuff like that, because it would suck to have to do this over and over again, right? The idea is to start doing lots and lots of these live recorded classes, and then it just kind of just ripples the information out there after it's done. Okay, let me take a drink of something. I've got a whiteboard over there, and it's got 6 topics on it, and I'm gonna jump through each one of them. That way I keep myself on track. Don't worry, I'll jabber a lot in between it. So first of all, welcome to My Apothecary. Now, I know a lot of people, what's funny is I've done videos in here before, and they've kind of been like, I really like the way the other place looked. And I'm like, I get it, but like this is like my FDA, CGMP, like everything stainless steel apothecary. And it was just made more sense to make the video here than somewhere where I'd have to like gather everything I need and go somewhere just for aesthetics. So this is practical. And it looks like we've got about 200 people here, so I'm gonna go ahead and just jump right in. So what is an infused oil? Now, if you're completely new to this, it's not I understand that some people think an infused oil is the same thing as an essential oil. And I use air quotes because that's a market term. They're actually called VOCs, volatile organic compounds. They're highly concentrated, they're dangerous. You can learn my stance by going to wildwoodapothecary.org to learn all about that. So I won't go into that. So this is an essential oils. This is where we take whole plant matter in its natural state, and we put oil over top of it, and we let that infuse either somewhere cool and dark or warm and dark, whichever, depending on what we're making. And what happens is the oil extracts the medicinal and herbal properties that we're after into itself. So at the end of this, we strain this out, Just realized I didn't get some stuff ready to talk about straining it out, but that's okay, that's okay. I'm in my apothecary, so it won't be far for me to grab stuff. So basically what you're going to do is put your herbs of choice in a jar and pour oil over top and either set that somewhere cool and dark or warm and dark. Literally, I could be done with this class in like 2 minutes because that's all it is. But I want to go into more layers with you of what herbs to choose and why we're going to do this and why one way might work better than another way. And depending on which herb we use, it could be back and forth. But in a nutshell, an herbal infused oil is just herbs with your choice of oil poured over top, and you let it sit for an extended amount of time, usually between 3 to 6 weeks, sometimes longer, depending on what we're making. And that's really all an herbal infused oil is. Okay, so next it's like, we're gonna get into a little bit of a debate here. What, some people say, let me take this off because I'm sweating out from being nervous. Some people say that you should only use fresh plant matter or like really well wilted plant matter when you're making an infused oil. It's superior, it's better, it's this, it's that. But I really challenge that. Unless we're working with something that has a property that disappears when it's dried, and St. John's wort is a really good example of that. Her hypersin content that makes her go red. See that color there? You can't really catch that color if you're using dried plant matter. And that's because the hypersin, and that just lets you see the color better, it disappears. It dissipates drastically. It goes away by like 95% of it goes away. So a lot of people are like, oh, I'm making it, dried and it's just as fine. I'm like, actually, no, because that hypersin content goes away. Content, whatever. It goes away. So if your plant of choice that you're working with has a particular oil soluble property that goes away when it's dried, that's when you want to use fresh or well wilted plant matter. However, if you're using something that doesn't really have a property that you're after, that dissipates when it's dry, choose dried. Really, choose dried, because the difference between dried and wet is that this St. John's wort oil could only sit a max of 6 weeks, and it's not if it goes rancid or moldy, it's when, because ultimately there's water content in this oil even if you're not pressing it. And what happens when water combines with oil, it's a bacterial explosion. So basically you are taking that risk because you want that particular content that you can't get otherwise. But when you use something dry, like let's say plantain, sure, in 6 weeks, if you use fresh plant matter, you'll have a pretty decent infused oil. I like it, it's nice, right? But here's the deal. You can't catch water soluble properties in oil. And there's not really a whole lot of water-soluble properties in plantain that we're worried about, right? So my debate is science. Science says that water and oil can't combine without an emulsifier. So when you use fresh plant matter in an oil, because you're like, well, I want those fresh properties that are in the plant, it doesn't really make sense because you literally can't catch water-soluble properties in oil. It's just not going to happen. What you do is you expose yourself to the risk of bacteria and things like that. But on top of that, I can make an oil infusion. I don't like to use the word stronger because I don't want us to always equate herbs with strength with being better. But I can make a more potent. I can make a more potent plantain oil with fresh plantain than you can with with dried plantain than you can with, let's say, fresh plantain. And you know why? Because when I'm making an oil infusion with dried plant matter, I can do two things that you can't do when you're using fresh plant matter. I can apply long-term heat, and I can let it sit for a really long time. This is my toothache oil that a lot of you know and love, and by the time I strain this, that oil will be twice as dark, and it's because I can let this sit in a hot, dark place for the better part of 8 weeks or more. And so at first, when you use dried plant matter, in the first few weeks, it'll change color quickly. It'll seem more potent than if you were using dried plant matter. But the thing is, I can go longer. I can go longer with dried plant matter and end up with something more potent than you can with fresh plant matter. So it's like a matter of patience. Like at first, a fresh one might seem, really nice and quick, and even though quick is a relative term to how long it takes. But the fact that I can go longer means that this oil is able to bust open the cellular structure of the plant, get in there and absorb. Because that's the point of pretty much any type of infusion, whether it's oil, whether it's water, whether you're making a tincture, is to bust open the cellular structure of a plant so the healing and herbal and medicinal properties can then be extracted into whatever medium you're using. So the funny thing to add on top of that is when you're using fresh plant matter, it has really rigid cells. So I usually try to explain the cellular difference to people in this way. Think about raw meat. Raw meat is soft, right? Raw meat is soft, it's all bendable, right? Now think about a carrot. A carrot is hard, right? So when you cook meat, hot and fast, what happens? It toughens up, right? And then when you cook a carrot for a long time, what happens? It goes soft, right? So I probably didn't have to add meat into that equation, but so it's the difference between the cellular structure, and when you're using something that's fresh, it has a fresh plant, it has a rigid cellular structure. But as you cook it, and drying is a type of cooking, the cellular structure breaks down. That's why you can crumble dried plant matter, but you can't crumble fresh plant matter really, and so you've already taken the step of breaking down the cellular structure when you choose to work with dried plant matter. So you just end up with way more ability to extract, especially when you add heat to that, because heat starts to erode those cellular structures even more, and you get a really nice dark oil. So that is the debate between fresh and dry plant matter. But really what it comes down to, depending on what herb you're working with, is asking yourself, is there an oil-soluble property in this plant that goes away when it's dried? And if the answer is yes, choose a well-wilted plant matter, and you're going to want to do that in a cool, dark place, and you're going to want to keep an eye on it, and you want to strain it before 6 weeks or at 6 weeks, because after that, your mold levels, you've got basically, imagine putting a fresh vegetable in this oil, eventually it's going to rot. Right? And if you're making something out of this that will end up having an emulsification process, like you're making a body cream or a lotion, I really urge you, if possible, to choose dried plant matter, because then you don't have bacteria in the oil that you'll be using in your lotion or cream that will have to be preserved because it can go bad, right? Okay, so I think that made sense. Let me take another drink here. I'm hoping that my adrenaline will crash slightly, a little bit, and I'll calm down. And isn't that so funny that I go live constantly, and I talk to thousands of people about things that I make. But for some reason, teaching you about it makes me all, oh shit. But I know what I'm talking about. I've done this for years, but I think if you were just sitting here with me, it would be different, right? Because I would just be having a conversation with somebody and just brain dumping on you. But I'm like, I don't know. There's all these unknown people watching, but it'll be all right. And the next one, I won't be nervous. So just that first one, but you gotta just jump in and do it, right? Okay, so how to pick an oil. So a lot of people ask me my oil of choice, and my oil of choice is avocado. I love avocado oil. I buy it by the hundreds of gallons for what I do. And I source that ethically too, by the way. There's, oh God. Well, honestly, there's nothing that you can buy in the world that at some point wasn't made unethically. So it's a hard thing to navigate, but anyhow, I like avocado oil because it's really nice and fatty, healthy fats, and your skin just drinks that up, right? So this is avocado oil, but you can really pick any oil you want. I urge you to stay away from things that go rancid really quickly, which are some seed oils, in particular vegetable oil. That stuff is just horrendous for you. You shouldn't be eating it. Don't put it on your skin. and stay away from things like canola oil. And they're really like, if a fast food restaurant buys it to fry stuff in, don't use it. Don't use it. But what you want to do when you're picking an oil, if you're making something for yourself or to test out, is start reading about these different oils. What type of skin type do I have? What do I want this oil to do for me? How is this oil going to react on dry skin, or which is actually greasy skin, or acne prone skin? Why do I want to use this oil? What am I going to use this oil for? Is it going to be a body massage oil? Is it going to be turned into a lotion? What do I want this oil to do for me? And so part of herbalism in general that I see a lot of people skim on is really diving into the why they want something to do something, or why they choose something. It's really easy to parrot what people say. Like, I like avocado oil personally, but I want you to choose avocado oil because you like what you've read about it, because you've liked the research that you've done about it, because you feel like it would match you for that. And you could say the same thing about almond oil or jojoba oil or olive oil, all these different things. I want you to use it because you made a conscious decision after doing a little bit of research that that was the oil that would work for you. Not just because some other herbalist or mom blog post or otherwise said that's the oil that you have to use. Because then you're in more control of your own personal creativity. Right? And I'll touch more on this in a little bit, I'm sure. But I personally like avocado oil because I find that it doesn't go rancid very easy. It just doesn't. And I make a lot of stuff into other stuff, like high heat stuff. Like I'm making lotions and body oils. And avocado oil has a really high smoke temperature. I mean, it's like 400 degrees before the stuff starts burning. And it's also a healthy oil, meaning I also cook with avocado oil if I'm not using tallow or lard or chicken fat or something like that, because healthy animal fats are really important for you. But avocado oil is a good choice too. It's worth looking for organic oil when possible, and the least processed as possible too, because did you know that like a ton of oils that you buy in the store, they've actually already gone rancid, and these big companies, they bleach, they use chemical extraction, they use heat, they use filtration processes to remove color and smell. So it's really important, like that first press, that virgin press, that non-treated, buy organic when possible. And I know that, you know, it's a little bit more spendy, but the thing is, it'll last you longer when you're turning it into like a body oil or a salve compared to if you're cooking with it. So you're like, this amount of avocado oil, you know, I don't know, it depends on how much you cook. You could probably go through this cooking-wise in about 2 months. Maybe 3 months, you know, depending on what you're adding to your pan. You go through probably more than you realize. But if you turn it into a body oil, you're not necessarily, or a salve or whatever, you won't go through it as fast. This is a lot of body oil. Like if you had a half-gallon jar of body oil, it would probably last you a year or more, even if you're using it once a day, because you're only using a few, you know, and then rubbing all over. You won't go through it as fast as if you're cooking. So the value changes, right? Because versus the thing that you'd run out of in a few months compared to what you're going to be using for a year or more. So do your research on your oils. Ask yourself what you're wanting this oil to do and the herbs that you've infused into it. What part of the body are you using it on? Like, is this oil bad for us in general? Like, before you choose it, and like go that way. And know that if you don't like it, you can move on. But you can also combine oils if you want. Some people like to use coconut oil and olive oil and all these things combined, and just find what works best for you. And if you have to go cheaper at first, that's okay too. You're just learning, you know. And so if something does go rancid, well, it sucks when that happens, or if it gets mold, you can dump it and not be out like tons and tons and tons of money. But I also suggest for that purpose, and I just kind of filled a jar here, maybe start with a smaller jar. Maybe don't make a half gallon, maybe even make just a pint. You know, something that if you do have to dump it, it's not the end of the world, and you can just mark it up to learning. Because you will have an oil go bad on you, especially if you're using fresh plant matter or wilted plant matter, and you will have an oil go rancid on you eventually when you're using dried plant matter too, because rancidity isn't caused by the plants, it's just oil has a shelf life. And that usually takes a few years though, but it can happen. Okay, so next up, oh, here's the part where I really get to talking. I'm kind of excited. I'm like, oh, that's what I have to do now. Let me get a drink here. And because somebody's probably asking what am I drinking, even though you can't see it in the cup. This is Linden Infusion, so I don't lose my voice while I talk. Because it like coats my throat and everything. So next up is how do we go about choosing the herbs that we want to use. Now I know, again, a lot of you wanted me to tell you exactly what herbs to bring so you could follow along, but again, I'm going to help you learn how to instill your confidence in choosing herbs so you can make your own blend of things. So I have all these herbs lined up over here. Yesterday I took a little bit of time and I put a bunch of herbs in jars, and you know, don't mind my shitty handwriting. But basically, I want to go through these with you and not so much talk about the herbs themselves, but kind of give you an example of like how a relationship with the herbs that we have will help us, I don't know, kind of like hone in on what herbs we're going to be using and learning how to make complex things that are different out of all the same thing. So let me grab my phone here and switch it around. Okay, so I've got a whole lineup of herbs, you know, cloves, lavender, hemp, cayenne, usnea, yarrow, comfrey, plantain, calendula, cleavers, orange peel, rose petal, coffee beans, and rose hips. So the thing I want you to know about these is a lot of people paint them into a corner. When you think of lavender, you might think of the fact that she's like calming, right? But did you know that she's also really good for sore bodies? When you think of hemp, and I swear to God that's hemp, it's not a jar of weed. When you think of hemp or cannabis, you think of either getting high or helping with pain, but she's also a powerful anti-inflammatory. When you think of cayenne, you think of spicy food, but she's a powerful pain reliever, and really good for the cardiovascular system, especially if your ancestors evolved eating spicy things. And then there's usnea, and she's good for like immune system, but she's also good for like healing. And then yarrow, and then you kind of come into like the things that are, you know, more as like antibacterial or antiviral. And then, you know, you think of comfrey and plantain, and let me just rant here for a while, of healing allies, and the calendula too, you know, that's good for itchy skin and all this stuff. And you come into like the orange peels and the rose hips and the coffee beans, and they're more astringent, drying, skin tightening, right? And all of that's correct. But what if I told you that you could switch these up? So what if I told you that yarrow was also good for pain management? And what if I told you that comfrey isn't just healing, she can help like improve skin cell production, and that plantain can do the same thing, and that while calendula is really good for like, oh geez, I totally lost the word, eczema and psoriasis, and so is cleavers. They're both also pretty good lymphatic stimulators, you know, getting your immune system up and running by supporting your lymphatic glands. And so basically, let me flip you around here. I gotta find a button. Okay, so, and then I gotta plug you back in, so bear with me. So what the point I want to get across here, well, okay, there we go. The point I want to get across here is that it's really easy. Is this the right analogy? I don't know. I could say it completely wrong. It's really easy to pigeonhole an herb. To say that, oh, the only thing that calendula is good for externally is like eczema and psoriasis, and, you know, maybe a little like healing up scars. Those are the things you hear often, so you'll pick her for that. And then let's say if you wanted to use something for lymphatic flow, common herbalists would reach for something like really potent, like poke root infused oil or something like that, right? But what that's a symptom of is not getting to know the herbs really well that you're working with, and having like a personal relationship with a handful versus hundreds. So like typically when I see an herbalist, and I'm not trying to judge, it's just kind of like an outside perspective, and like I wonder if that's what's going on. When they work with hundreds and hundreds of plants, when I see them use calendula for skin problems, but reach for something really strong for lymphatic support, I feel like it's primarily a symptom of only getting to know these herbs on a surface level, because if you get to know these herbs on a stronger level, what happens is you know that, well, calendula is really great for skin, but she's also really good for getting our lymphatic system up and moving, way more gentle than a lot of other herbs, and is really effective, whether that's externally or internally, right? And so, and if we're being honest with ourselves, I don't care if you study herbs your entire life, you will not be able to make a meaningful, deep understanding relationship with each one of these plants if you jump around constantly. If you have hundreds and hundreds of plants that you pull out of your back pocket to use, it's just a symptom of not understanding these plants on a deeper, more complex level. And I bring this all up because when you really get to know who you're working with, like calendula, I can both use her for a scar serum, and I can both use her to support, you know, people with psoriasis and eczema, and I can use her to support lymphatic flow if somebody's got swollen glands or water retention and things like that. And so that means I can use this herb in so many different ways, in different types of oils, that I don't really need to reach for something stronger, you know, or more potent, or, and not to say that you can't use other things, but that's just something to consider when you start learning about herbalism. Fight the urge to like pull in hundreds and hundreds of plants and jump all over the place. I almost took a drink of St. John's wort oil. I keep a lot of my drinks in mason jars, so it's bound to happen at some point, just taking a drink of oil or something that's not meant to be drank. Okay, now, I swear to God that all had a purpose. When it comes down to choosing an herb to make an infused oil with, everything I talked about is important, because you can say, okay, I want to use something to make a lymphatic flow massage oil, right? So I'm going to use cleavers and calendula to make myself a nice massage body oil that I can use along with like my other protocols that I'm doing to get like my lymphatic system up and moving. And just so you know, the lymphatic system is like, you ever get swollen glands here under your arms? Those are just a few of the glands that are all over your body, and they're basically like the super highway for your white blood cells. Your immune system travels around, sends messages. When it's not up and flowing well, you feel kind of yuck and they get swollen. And anyhow, not here to teach about the lymphatic system, but basically, so I can say cleavers and calendula is really amazing for a massage oil. But I could also say, well, why don't I add some comfrey to that? And now I know that these all have similar abilities and properties, but also comfrey steps in and fills in a gap that cleavers and calendula doesn't do. Well, yeah. So she has something, comfrey has something called allotonin in her, and basically she is a compound that stimulates your body to create new skin cells. It's amazing. Comfrey's amazing. They call her nip bone for a reason. She can heal broken bones. She can heal wounds fast enough that it's problematic, because you'll actually end up getting like debris or bacteria stuck in there, because the comfrey will heal the wound from the bottom down instead of the natural way a wound heals from the bottom up, right? So it prevents stuff getting caught in it. But these two don't do that. So when I add these together, I know that I am filling in a gap that these two don't cover, and then I can say, this is an oil for psoriasis or eczema. But I can take away the comfrey, and while they'll do the same thing to an extent, I can say, this is an oil for lymphatic flow, you know, for like breast health or things like that. But then I could jump in and say, well, I've got like something else going on that's a little stronger on my skin. And I could say, I want to throw in some yarrow for her antibacterial properties. And then I could say, okay, well, this is really good as an antifungal, right? Because calendula also has like some pretty strong volatile oils in her, and so she's pretty antimicrobial. And then you've got your yarrow, who's a powerhouse, kills all gram-positive bacteria on contact. And then you've got your cleavers that helps calm things down. And then you could add your comfrey that that helps boost skin cell production, right, to like heal up skin. And so what I'm trying to get across here is that at any given time you can change things out with the same herbs that you work with across the board, and how you combine them is how you make something different, right? And I know that seems really simple, but what I'm trying to say is that you don't have to get 200 different types of plants. When you're making an oil, what you can do with these plants is sit down and say, what does comfrey do? What does calendula do? What does cleavers do? Are they filling in the gaps, or are they supporting, right? So you can say it's important to pick herbs that have similar properties when you're combining them in an oil infusion. And then you can say, but what are we lacking? What are we lacking? What aren't we really combining here? So let me give another example. So if I wanted to grab and make myself a hemp oil or a CBD oil, you know what? She's really great for inflammation, but the thing is, she's not great for pain that isn't caused by inflammation, like if you've just got like aching nerves and things like that. So you can say, I can add another plant that is also good for inflammation, like lavender, but I could also say, what am I going to add that will support these two plants' ability to help with inflammation, or like fill in the gap of what they can't do? And you could add cayenne, right? Because cayenne, just as an example, she kind of excites our nerve endings so much that it blocks off the signal from sending pain. It basically just shuts down. So if you have pain that maybe CBD isn't helping, you still want to knock some of that inflammation caused by the pain. It's like a reaction that your body has, but she's not going to do it alone. So you find a supportive herb that kind of does the same thing, but does it in a different way, right? So cayenne and hemp together would make a really good pain salve. And I know a lot of you have definitely bought my hemp oil pain salve, and you know, these aren't the only things I have in it, but instead of just selling you a CBD salve, I'm making sure that I'm picking all different types of herbal allies that have similar properties to helping relieve pain, but they also stack on top of each other in the way that they relieve pain. So what I really want you to do when you start creating infused oils is to step back and look at these plants, really get to know them and ask them what they do. What do you do? When I read about this, she does this, but I notice she doesn't do this. But this plant that has similar properties, she's filling in those gaps and maybe potentially doing things beyond what this one does. And so when you're looking to pair something, it's a matter of finding plant people, finding plants that have similar properties, but also cover areas that the other one doesn't. And that's how you make a really, really solid oil infusion. And so what's really interesting, and just to keep jabbering about it, is I can say, you've heard me talk about calendula a bunch and how she's good for the immune support, but did you also know that she supports blood flow to your skin, so she can make you glow? So I could then add it with rose petal, who has natural tannins and helps tighten skin. And then I could also add coffee beans, who the caffeine, there's debates on if it goes into the oil. I'm not going to debate about it right now. I find that it does help stimulate blood flow as well. So you have a really nice face serum that helps wake up your skin on top of doing all the other things that it can do in any other salve, right? And so when I say don't pigeonhole an herb, don't just think of this herb as, you know, that's just what it does and I need to find something different. Really, really get to know the nuanced capabilities of the herbs that you're working with, and before you know it, you'll probably have an arsenal of like 30, 40 at most after years and years of working. I have about 15 or 20 that I use in conjunction in all of the face serums and butters and creams that I make, and I'm just using them in different portions, in different ways, in different combinations to make these amazing effective, easy, and simple infused oils. And it's really fantastic. I had somebody here a while back that was supposed to be helping me, didn't work out, and they ridiculed me when they helped me go through like my herb inventory because I only had like 15 or 20 different types of plants in there. And I'm like, but to me, when you have all of these copious amounts of plants that you're throwing into jars and that you're working with, there's nothing wrong with that. But to me, again, it's a symptom of not really having a deeper relationship with each plant that you choose to work with. And I feel like when we do that, we miss out on a lot of opportunity. We miss out on a lot of potential to really know these plants and to really be creative, right? So on that note of being creative, I'm encouraging you to really learn about these plants on your own, because what I see in the herbalist community a lot is, and this touches kind of on what I've been talking about a little bit off and on. Let me grab a drink here. We practice herbalism in a monkey see, monkey do way, and that stifles creativity. When somebody doesn't tell you how to choose to use these things and just gives you a recipe, you just do that. And you might follow that recipe and it might turn out well, and it might work really well for you or anybody you give it to, and you might be making it for years. But at the end of the day, if you don't really know why, if you don't know why all of a sudden you use calendula and your swelling went away, if you don't know why you added cayenne to hemp and it made your pain go away, it's kind of like you're a little bit powerless. And now I don't mean you don't have to know it down to like a terpene complex chemical reaction level here. I'm just meaning if you're not learning about these herbs out of your own curiosity and creating something that would work for you, and you're just following a recipe, you really fuck yourself over. You really do, because what happens is you're not building these relationships. And if you made your own recipe and you're like, I know it works because of this, all of a sudden when you think about doing something else, a different recipe, what happens is your brain sparks and says, well, I wonder if I took this out and put that in and shifted this around, wow, I made something incredibly different and new and effective out of the herbs that I already had on hand. Maybe I had to get, one or two extra or something like that to put in it. And I know the why. And so when it's okay to follow a recipe now and then, it's just, you can see when people are just parroting because it's the same stuff over and over again. And I don't mean that they're making the same stuff over and over again. There's nothing wrong with that. I mean that I can go to 200, 300, 500 Instagram herbalist accounts right now, or Facebook or whatever, and they're all making the same thing. And it doesn't make them bad herbalists or bad people, but it's just a symptom of they're not finding their own creativity in this, and that's when people start to steal from people, right? I can't tell you how many messages I get through my customer service where people are like, hi, I'm a so-and-so, and I would like to know the ingredients of your recipe before I purchase it. And some of those people are very real, but I'd say about 70% of the time, if I investigate the person, they're an herbalist that's making things to sell things, and they're just trying to swipe my recipe, which it wouldn't be the same because they don't know the portions and all these things. But it's just really important that you learn to be creative on your own. You can find inspiration. You can be like, wow, that's really neat. I wonder how I could do that. And you could try to create something that was similar, but on your own research, like how, you might decide not to use that herb, or you feel like something better might go with it. So that is my rant about how to choose herbs to go into it. So let's see. I guess now I gotta show you how to make an herbal infused oil. I didn't forget that. I'm actually gonna show you how to do it. And let's see, what do we want to make? And I know I can't see your comments. I imagine they're going like crazy. Let's see. Let's make something that is good for toning skin. So rose hips. Let's say we want to help with a little bit of scarring, so calendula. Let's say that we've got a little bacterial issue going on, so yarrow. And let's say we want it to have even more of an antibacterial property and smell good. So lavender, and then one more thing. Let me grab it. We really want to kick up that antibacterial property, like in case we're dealing with acne, so let's add in some pine pitch. And this came out of the fridge because, pro tip, if you're gathering pine pitch, use plastic bags. You can reuse them. I've reused this one all season long, but you're able to peel the pitch out of the bag. You won't be able to do that with a basket or anything else. You just, yeah, it'll destroy whatever you try to put it in if it can't be in there permanently and it's hard to get out. So I keep my pitch in the fridge. So now we're gonna go on to like, it's not complex. It really isn't that complex. But I'm gonna show you like legit how to make an infused oil. So one thing that I see people debate pretty often is this idea that if you keep track of what you're doing and do the same thing over and over again, that you destroy the magic. Oh, come the fuck on. You're not destroying the magic. You're not destroying the magic of herbalism. You're not, like, when people, okay, so this comes from a place of having to be CGMP, FDA certified for what I do. And I see a lot of people argue against it, that it's impossible, it's this, or that. It's not. It's record keeping. It's record keeping, people. And if I make something here that's really fantastic, I want to make it again. I want to make it again, and I want to make it again the exact way that I made it. And so you keep track of what you did. That doesn't destroy your creativity, and if anything, it reaffirms it, because you're like, well, that worked, and I wrote it down, and there it is. It confirms it. It holds onto it for you, so you don't try to have to hold it in your head. So I'm gonna grab myself a jar here and a scale. And so the thing is, I'm not following any particular recipe. I'm making it up as I go, but as I do that, I'm writing it down. There's no difference than if you were like making up like a cookie recipe or like a dinner. You write down what you did, because it really sucks at the end of the day. You're like, wow, that was amazing. Fuck, what did I do? I don't remember. Okay, so I'm gonna throw my jar onto a scale. First, I'm gonna add my pine pitch. And because I'm going to be using heat with this, I'm gonna put the pine pitch on the bottom, because that will be on the primary heat source. And you're gonna need the heat to melt down the pitch, basically. So let's see, how much pitch do we wanna put in this? Oh, she smells amazing. Okay. So, let's see, what are you? And I like to break up my pitch if I'm using pitch, because I want it to have more surface space. I could just put a clump in there, but a little bit more surface space is better. Oh, let me change this to grams. Okay. Whoops. So the thing is, these little digital scales are so cheap at like Walmart or somewhere like that these days. You can get them for like $5 or $10. You don't have to have like a $1,000 cocaine scale. Okay, so that's 1 ounce of pitch. So I'm gonna take my gloves off, and where is my pen? Need a pen, had a pen, found the pen. So I'm gonna write, and you can write this down in just like a little recipe journal or whatever you have. I use these pretty complex FDA CGMP compliant master batch records. You don't have to have it that complicated. Just write it down somewhere what you did. Just write down your recipe. So I'm gonna write down pine pitch, and then I put 1 ounce in there. All right. There's more that I would fill out if I was making an actual thing, but whatever. And I'd have a hairnet on and gloves and be all less romantic. Okay. So now I'm going to tare my scale, which means to take away the weight that it weighed. I'm going to add a little bit of calendula. And you're watching me completely make up a recipe on the fly. All right. So we're adding calendula because we want something to give us a nice glow to our skin, maybe help with a little bit of scarring. And she's nice and fluffy, so it takes quite a bit of her. And I'm just going to add another ounce. So almost there. Okay, so I'm gonna write down that I added calendula, 1 ounce, right? Okay, now let's say we're gonna add this yarrow so we have a nice, you know, antibacterial ability to her. And this is just yarrow bloom. And it looks like I'm doing 1 ounce for everything. And you can decide how much you want to add of anything. There are no rules. You could fill this all the way up with yarrow. You could use less yarrow, more yarrow. It's completely up to you. So nothing's stealing your creativity by keeping a record. Clearly it's a pet peeve of mine. Okay, so yarrow bloom, 1 ounce. Okay. Now let's say a little bit of lavender. She's strong, so I probably won't add a ton of her. The stronger something smells, the more volatile oils it has. And by smell, I don't mean like, I mean like a scent, right? Like lavender has a scent, but like rose hips kind of have a scent, right? Like they do, but they're not quite the same with the high volatile oil properties. So you don't have to use as much when you're doing that because there's a lot there. So a little goes a long way. You know, it's kind of like if you were working with cayenne, a little goes a long way. So let's just do maybe 1/2 ounce. All right. There is 1/2 ounce of lavender. Okay. Now, that was weird. I think my own hair pulled itself and it felt like somebody touched me. Okay, so now let's do, just losing my shit on live broadcast. Now let's do some dried rose petals. And you know what? I think I also wanted to add some orange peels. Now these are both going to be astringent and packed with vitamin C, and vitamin C does this really cool thing where it stimulates collagen production, and that's how it tightens and tones and gives a youthful appearance. She's also super antibacterial, so that's kind of like the theme of what we're working with here. So let's do a good amount of rose hips. Okay. So there is 4.5 ounces of rose hips. Oh, yep, did that right. I thought I'm dysgraphic, which is a type of dyslexia. So sometimes I write stuff like, not backwards, like the letters aren't backwards, but like if I'm going to write T-O, I might write the O first. And so I wrote the weight down before the name, and I was like, what happened there? Okay, so next up, orange peels. This batch of orange peels that I got smells like a creamsicle. It must be from a different type of orange than I usually get, and she's just amazing. So I'm gonna fill this up almost the rest of the way with orange peel. Okay, that's 7 ounces of orange peel. Okay. All right, so basically I've written down everything that I did, excluding I have to write down the oils. And if I was doing this for like, I was making a batch of something, which I very well could, I would go down and I would put all the lot numbers, and I have to do all the stuff where I'm like tracking every freaking move that I make. But again, it's not a bad thing because then I know where everything came from. It even ends up making it easier for you because like a year from now, you might be like, I really like those orange peels, but I don't remember where I bought them from. But if you're keeping records of everything that you do, you know where you bought them from. You even know the lot number, because when you get a bag of herbs, typically it has a lot number on it, and that means that that company is keeping track of where they got it from. And a lot of herb places are required to test their herbs and verify identity and things like that. So it's just a peace of mind of knowing where all these moving pieces are at. So now I've got my herbs into my jar that I want, and aren't they beautiful? You guys have watched me pour a million billion things like this. So now I know that I'm gonna add probably close to 1/2 gallon of avocado oil. Okay. You're just gonna add your oil. And now, normally, you know, when I'm making a tincture, I tell you to fill it all the way to the top to prevent oxidation. There's a catch-22 when we do that with oil, because it is going to prevent oxidation if you fill it all the way up. But we're going to heat this oil, and the thing that a lot of people don't realize is that when you heat oil, it expands. So if you fill it all the way up, you need to make sure that it's somewhere that it's okay that the oil leaks out of the jar and onto the, you know, wherever it's sitting on. You can put a plate underneath of it. Sometimes you can do a towel or cardboard, but eventually that'll get saturated. It could if you have enough jars, and it'll just keep melting out. So I typically fill it to like right about here. And then what happens, because we're heating it, it will expand up to the top, and then I won't have air in there. It'll push the air out for the most part. Okay. So, figures I'm calmed down as soon as I'm almost done. No, we have more stuff to go over, and then we can do questions and stuff. So yeah, and it takes time. It takes time for it to soak in. You don't always have to pack your jars completely full. It depends on what you're making, really. Depends on how strong it is. Like, I could do like half a jar of just lavender, and I could fill it all the way up, and that would be plenty potent for a lavender infused oil. But I do like to work with what I call full saturation, where you have enough herbs in your blend, or even just the size of the jar that you're using, that there's not a whole ton of space left. Especially with some stuff that's maybe not as potent. Although if we look at this blend, almost everything in here has a lot of volatile oils, meaning smell. We've got orange peels, we've got the rose hips, we've got the yarrow and the calendula, you know, and pine pitch too. There's lots of terpenes in these things that give them that smell. And then, you know, sometimes it takes a minute for it all to soak in, but I think we've got it. So maybe a little splash more, because there's still going to be a little bit of air that comes up. All right. Now I'm just going to cap it. I'm going to steal the cap off of those rose hips, and then I'm going to make a label for it. That seems self-explanatory. I don't have a product name for this. Don't have a name for this. I'm going to call it live video oil. I might rename it at some point in time. Live video oil. And what's the date today? The 11th? Yes, 10, 11, 20. And I'm gonna slap a sticker on. Oh wait, that's oil. My fucking even my labels are all complex, because I have to match up my batch label has to match my batch record. So there's all these numbers that I have up here that are supposed to be going over onto this, if I was making a batch. And then I'm just gonna stick a label on it. You can stick it on the side, acknowledge that oil is going to run over it and like fuck it up. So sometimes you can also stick it just on the top. And then it's not as likely to, you know, it won't get as oily because it's not running over it. So the next step is, where do we store this and how? No, you stay down, label. Bug me. Where do we store this and how do we treat it? So because this is all fresh plant, or I'm just knocking it out of the park today. Because this is all dried plant matter, I am going to choose to keep this somewhere pretty warm. And I don't mean your crock pot for a few hours or even a few days. I'm gonna rip into that for a second. You cannot create a properly infused oil in a crock pot or on the top of your stove unless you let that stuff like slowly heat for like 8+ weeks. Right? Like at least 6 weeks at the minimum. You're not really getting the benefits of that whole plant or the plants that you're working with. What you're doing is you're catching their most volatile properties first. You're catching the scent, and you're catching the color. Usually if you're using, like, I see a lot of people do it with like comfrey and stuff like that. They're like, look how dark that oil is. I'm like, cool, you caught some chlorophyll. You're just catching the color of the plant. You're not necessarily giving it enough time to break down the cellular structure of that plant material that we talked about earlier, and it's just not as effective. It is just not the same. So I'm going to show you something pretty cool. And it's going to be me taking a drink of an infusion. Now I'm going to show you how I heat mine. Okay, So I'm going to stick this somewhere warm and dark. So let me grab my camera here. Let me flip you around. Okay, there's my apothecary. We're going somewhere special. Okay. This is my hot box. It is just one of those like pool supply things, you know, that you'd put like all of your like, or whatever. It's just an outside box. I sell them at Home Depot. You can get smaller ones. You can make, I'll talk to you about making a smaller one. Essentially what I've done is I've lined it with foam insulation, and then there's 2 layers here, another layer underneath of that. I'm using seed heating mats to heat the box up. So now I'm just going to put my infused oil that we've made right there, and what it's going to do is it's going to warm up really nicely. It is nice and warm in here. Let me show you how warm it is in here. Let me grab this. It is 109.4 where the thermometer is at. Now, I like to get these thermometers because I don't want it to get to really much above 112. I usually keep it right at 110. And what happens is when it hits that particular temperature, it turns off. And I really like that too because it's a safety mechanism. So like if it's warmer in the apothecary, it's going to be warmer in the box, and that's a problem. You know, you don't want it to get too hot and burn your fucking house down. Right? So this turns it off, and you just plug your seed heating mat right into it, and you can up and down the temperature and set it to what it needs to be at. And so I keep all kinds of stuff in here. These are little 3-gallon barrels of tincture, and these are usually mushrooms that are in here because they really need the heat to extract their medicinal properties. I've got some electuaries brewing in here, and then there's a whole nother layer below of other different types of infused oils and tinctures and things like that. And then I'm just shutting the box, and it keeps the heat in. Now, another option that I do, and this would only be if you get really big, is these are, and there's the batch label stuff I was talking about. These are heated little blankets that are meant for 5-gallon buckets, and they're meant for keeping honey warm and from keeping it from crystallizing, but I use it to infuse my oils. Now, a lot of people freak out about using plastic. I wouldn't use plastic if I was making a tincture, but you can get this really intense food grade plastic, and it's safe. It's like really like FDA approved safe, and as long as it doesn't get above 120 degrees, you don't have any problems with it. There's no types of BPAs or anything else in it, and you can buy these online pretty cheap. These are not cheap. I wouldn't go with the heated honey thing unless that's really something that you get into doing big batches of things. So let me flip you around here. Okay, so you don't have to, my sticker wall, you don't have to make one of these heat boxes so big. You can get tiny little seed heating mats that just for starting seeds that are like pretty small, and you can get yourself a cheap little Tupperware box, and you can put it in the bottom and it'll hold heat like that. For years, and this isn't probably necessarily safe. I'm gonna go back over here because I don't have an ass and sitting on that box is painful. And I'm plug myself back in too. Oh, almost lost the thing. I used to, let me be super professional here. There we go. I used to take the seed heating mat, put my jars on top of it, and then put a wool blanket over top of it to hold in heat. And I had the temperature control thing, but that is so dangerous. It is so dangerous. And that was, years ago when I was only making like, 5 or 6 jars of things. So I really don't suggest doing that. Just get yourself a cheap little Tupperware box that can fit the seed heating mat and have a heat controller on it, and then you can just sit your oil that you make on top of the seed heating mat and close the box. Then you could cover the box with a blanket, but I just don't want it to be in contact with the hot jars and things like that. And if you do that, I want you to make sure that you buy the temperature control thing so it'll turn off if it gets too hot. Don't worry, it doesn't turn off forever. It'll click back on. That's cool. So that'll turn off when it gets too hot, and then when it cools down, it'll click back on. And they're, an extra 20, 30 bucks. Sometimes if you're just buying a small seed heating mat, the thermostat control is probably going to be more expensive than the seed heating mat itself. But I'll tell you what, because of all the craziness that's going on, People really, 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 really went hardcore into gardening this year. And if I had to guess, probably about 65, maybe 70%, I'm probably being generous there, are not as generous as I could be, whatever. They probably decided that they don't like to garden. They probably are not using these seed heating mats. They are probably have no intention because they can get food easier now. They're not as scared. You could probably throw up an ad on your local like Facebook Marketplace or Craigslist looking to buy a used seed heating mat. And it's used. It's used. So like if they bought it for 20 bucks on Amazon, give them 10. Talk them down to 10. They might take 8 if you're like, I got 8 cash. You know, and then you can do that way. But also, if you just don't want to spend anything, if you're really on a tight budget, some places that are warm are the top of your fridge, the top of your water heater, next to a heating vent, right next to your oven if you bake a lot. It won't be as consistently warm, but it's better than nothing. And then you could cover it with a little something to help keep it warmer. What I don't want you to do is sit this in the sun. Anybody rewatching this and then it's coming into summer, please stop using the sun to infuse your oils. My God. The sun is a great decayer. Her job, one of her many jobs, is to kickstart the decomposition of dead things. I don't care if it's a mammal or a plant or a rock. I'm not a rock. But I guess maybe eventually it could bleach it. You know, she degrades things. And so you think it's really cool because at first you're like, wow, look at that color that I've caught in the oil really fast. You caught that oil because she was really degrading the cellular structure, which is a good thing, but it tips over the other edge really fast to where not only does she degrade the cellular structure so you've got that color really fast, she's degrading the oil and she's degrading the mineral properties and the medicinal properties and all these things that you worked really hard to extract. By the time you use that, it's like half as strong as it could be. And same for like storing your herbs. I see so many herb shops that are like big, beautiful window with their herbs in jars, sun hitting the jars. Don't buy those herbs. Don't buy those herbs. They've been degraded by the sun. Some people just have them up for like display, right? You ask them and then they go get it. They don't get it out of the jar and that's fine. But a lot of people don't. A lot of people are selling you really degraded herbs because the light's been hitting them. And so resist the urge to use the sun to infuse your oils unless you slip like a sock or you sew yourself like a jar cozy. You could probably put them in a box, like a black box outside, because it would get nice and hot in there. It's not the heat that from the sun that hurts them, it's the actual UV rays that are breaking it down. And so you really, really, really want to avoid that. So if you are going to make a freshly wilted plant matter, almost a tincture oil. If you're going to make a freshly wilted oil, and that's perfectly fine. You know, like I made the St. John's wort oil. I let this sit in a cool, dark place for no longer than 6 weeks. You can't use heat. You want to definitely keep it out of the light, and no matter what, you want to strain it by 6 weeks. And you should probably be checking it at least every week for signs of mold or yeast or bacteria. And just to touch back on why I don't like to use fresh plant matter unless I really have to. By the time you see mold growing on this, it already had mold. What you're seeing is, it's kind of like, all right, and I'm not judging because I grew up having to do this. You're like, oh, the bread's moldy. Oh, just take that piece off. You're fine. We were eating mold because what happens is this bacteria, this mold, what it does is it sends out little tendrils, basically like mycelium, kind of like a mushroom, and it grows all the way through it. But you don't see that until it fruits, which is, so when you're actually seeing the mold, you're seeing the fruiting body of this entire mildewed, like, oh, what the community, that's not the word I was looking for. So like, by the time you see mold in something, it was already bad. You just didn't know it. So let's talk about things that we can't add to our oils without extra steps, or just we can't in general while we're infusing. So what you can't add to an oil that is infusing or when it's done infusing is anything that's water-based. I have so many people that are like, I tried to add a tincture, I tried to add glycerin, I tried to add this, I tried to add that. You can't do it. You can't do it because water and oil, even if it's not technically water, if it's water-based, they collide. They collide on a molecular level. Now, you're like, well, then how do you make like creams and lotions that have water and oil? You use an emulsifier, which is like usually a vegetable-derived chemical wax. I mean, I do that because it's a chemical, but it's natural. It freaks people out, but it shouldn't. It's just science. And it forces the oil and the water to go together. And eventually I'll do a video on creams and things like that. But in a nutshell, you cannot add anything water-based to your oil infusion. And that almost wraps back around talking about the fresh plant matter versus dry. Like, you are putting water in there. So if you do that, it's a really, really important not to press it, squeeze it in any way, because you're going to squeeze water into your oil and then, you know, bacterial explosion. And then if you do turn these oils into a cream or something that has water emulsified into it, you absolutely have to use a preservative because of said bacterial explosion. And even then, preservatives only last for so long. Like, unless, but the stuff you buy at the store, they have like seriously like dangerous level preservatives in it. It's the only way that, let's say, like your bottle of Jergens lotion has been in your desk for like 2 years and hasn't molded. It's not because they made it in like such an amazing way. It's because they use some fucking serious preservatives that just really, really aren't great for your skin. And you still need to use, and I'm drifting here talking about creams and stuff, but you still need to use a real preservative. Please hear me when I say essential oils are not preservatives. Please hear me when I say grapefruit seed extract is not a preservative. You can use alcohols in a preservative, but you gotta somehow make your recipe 25% alcohol, and that is a task that most big companies, when they do that, they have other chemicals that they add so you don't feel how or smell the alcohol, kind of like with, did you know they put like, again, drifting. Did you know that like when you drink soda, there's so much sugar in it that they have to add chemicals that you don't taste how sweet it is? So think of that when you like buy like stuff from the store. You're like, well, this one didn't go bad for like 6 years. It's crazy. It's a crazy amount of stuff in it. So other things that we can add, and I could have been better prepared for this. All I have is a jar of tallow and a spoon. You can add anything that's oil soluble, like fats. Like this is some deer fat been rendered down into tallow. Tallow is any fat from any red meat animal. You can use lard, which comes from pigs. Sure, you can use chicken fat if you want to. I don't care. You can also use coconut oil, and you can use shea butter and nut butters. These things that are compatible with oils. Now, if you put these in your jar beforehand, and that's perfectly fine, you'll need to use the heat because, you know, it's kind of room solid, right? Like, and the heat will make it melt down, and then you'll infuse your oils or your tallows. It'll just become an oil and infuse the herbs with it. I like to use tallow. I use tallow in anything possible. People are like, oh, you have a vegan option? I'm like, maybe you can buy the serum, but like, try tallow. Tallow is so amazing for your skin. You are a red meat animal, whether you like to admit that to yourself or not. And, you know, another red meat animal, you have really similar fats, and so your skin, from showering chlorine water and using soap and things like that, is really stripped away from these healthy fats. In fact, if you have greasy skin, it's because your skin is desperately dry and craving fats, and you keep washing it off, and it keeps coming back, and you get into this horrible cycle. And tallow, since it's so similar to our fat, our skin is like, oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for feeding this. People are like, what do you do to your skin? Because I know I don't have blemishes or anything. I'm like, well, I never use soap on my face. And when I do moisturize my face, about, maybe once or twice a week, probably more in the summertime, I just get out of the shower and I'm either putting on a cream or something that I've made that has tallow in it, or sometimes if I really want a deep drink, I'll mix just a little bit of tallow with a little bit of avocado oil and just put that on my face. I have a lot of options because I make a lot of things, but tallow. But again, you can use any type of these butters to add in if you want it to melt down while you've got it in your hot box. You know, it probably won't work necessarily on top of a refrigerator or a water heater because it's not quite warm enough. But you could try it, but I'd put kind of how I put the pine pitch on the bottom of the jar, put the tallow on the bottom, I mean, put the tallow or whatever butters you're using on the bottom of the jar so they get the most heat. Oh, do not put your jar on top of your wood stove. You can get away with it for a while, and you can use, like, maybe you're like, I'm smart, and I'll use a ring. And I'll put it on top of the ring so it won't damage the jar. One time years ago, and it actually wasn't an oil infusion, but I'm just telling you that mason jars don't handle the heat of a wood stove well. They don't. And so I had, you know, it was pretty cold, had a good fire going, and I had, you know, I actually think it was like a double stacked ring situation. I had it pretty high up, and I was making an electuary, and eventually I'll do a class on that, or at least a video. An electuary is where you put powdered herbs that you powder freshly yourself, or tea or whatever, and you blend it into honey, and then it's like an instant tea, right? So I had a half-gallon jar sitting on my stove, and the fucking jar broke. The jar broke, and a half-gallon of honey-infused herbs hit a very hot stove top from my wood stove, and the house proceeded to fill up with sugar smoke because it's honey and hot sugar, and it's black and it's crystallized, and it was like -10 out. We were still way up in the mountain at that point in time, and it just yeah, oil wouldn't be any better. Even though avocado oil has a high, or whatever oil you use might have a high smoke point, it's still gonna smoke you out of your house. And then it was so hot that when we stripped all the honey off after it cooled down, we had to re-season the stove because it was cast iron, you know, and it like stripped it all off. So you can sit it next to your wood stove. You can sit it near your wood stove. Maybe a shelf above your wood stove, but probably at least 2 feet above your wood stove. Don't put it right on your, my other half was like, oh, Jesus Christ, because it was a project. It was sticky, and it was sticky too for what didn't burn, because it was, you know, honey when it gets liquid, when it gets warm it turns into a liquid, so it was like goosh. And there was jars next to it that got taken out by like the crossfire of the jar broken, so it was just like an avalanche of Jesus Christ, this is horrendous everywhere. So yeah, don't put it on top of your wood stove. What haven't I talked about? I've talked about heat versus cold. I've talked about dry versus moist. So what we can turn these oils into. We can turn these oils into just a body oil. You can strain it and just use it as is. And thinking about straining it, let me pretend like I was prepared for this. Just give me a second here. 1 second. Okay. That wasn't too bad. So a lot of you have seen me strain things on my Instagram TV anyways, on my IGTV and my Instagram stories. That's a better word for it. I like to use nut milk bags, and I laugh every time because, like, you could have come up with a better name. It's a nylon mesh bag that people try to make nut milk out of, but let's be honest, you're not making nut milk, you're making nut juice. Which is even funnier. Okay, so of course I grabbed one that's all tied up and knotted. Hold on. Let me grab a fresh one from a fresh box that hasn't been tied up and knotted, and show you what I do. So this is basically like the press you can get these on Amazon. You can buy like yourself like a fruit press, you know, those are pretty cheap. They're like 30-40 bucks, and they usually come with this handy little pot. You could kind of use a strainer if you want to. Oh, of course, I grabbed a thin one. Let's find a wide one. Let's see. There's only big ones here. Told you I wasn't prepared. So imagine that this was wide enough. Imagine that this was wide enough that I could go over the top of this. Basically, I take my oil and I dump it in here, the plant matter and all, and this catches the plant matter and the oil can strain out. Now I want to tell you a funny story. About a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, I had, it's like it came with this. It's a press, and you twist it, and you twist it, and you twist it, and it pushes whatever's in there out, you know, so we're getting like oils and tinctures and stuff like that. And as we grew, man, that kills your arms. It's hard. You can't do big amounts. It's just like you started getting like back problems. Now, if you're doing this at home just for, you know, a few batches here or there, and you're not like producing things to sell to people, it's not that big of a deal. But I was like, fuck this. I can't do this anymore. I'm too tired. I'm grumpy. I'm angry. We're going to Harbor Freight. I went to Harbor Freight, and y'all recognize this maybe. And Harbor Freight is just, you don't have to go to Harbor Freight. You can look it online. There's probably places around you. Harbor Freight is just a place that sells like tools. They just sell like every type of tool and part you could need. You know, they sell like hydraulic presses, for example. So I bought this little hydraulic press. Comes together in a kit. You put it together. It took me like an hour. And then I took the pot that I had and I set it there. And then basically I just take the press handle and I do that. And this part just presses down onto like a plate that I put in there that smashes it out. So it flattens it for me, and it doesn't really get any harder. It's so easy to use, right? It takes a lot of physical effort off of me. And I made a video of when I first made it. I'm gonna set down on all my bags. I made a video of when I first made it, and I just posted it to my IGTV just because like it was too long of a video to post in my stories, and I was like, this is what I've been up to today. And that stupid video went viral. I mean, like, viral. Like, I only had like, I don't know, like 35,000 followers, and within like a 24-hour period it jumped up to like 90,000 followers. And then like for like a month straight, anytime I'd post, I'd lose thousands of followers because people just compulsively followed just because it was like a popular thing to do, and then they leave. But I could not convince the internet that I did not invent the hydraulic press. You can get these online for like 80 bucks. And then you can just find a little pot, or build yourself a little pot that just presses down in and then just pushes the liquid, whether that's oil or whether that's tincture. It could be juice, whatever. If you want to smash some grapes in here, that would work just fine too. And it'll only cost you about 80 bucks. That's the crazy thing. Maybe 100 bucks all in, maybe 150 with shipping. But if you go online right now to buy yourself a tincture press that you would use for like oils or tinctures or whatever, these people are going to charge you like between $300 to $500. What? Go buy a hydraulic press. It's so easy. I've got a real massive one that I'm working on converting into for our big batches, and I'll share a video of that when that's ready too. But so basically, when your sit time is up, when your oil has been infusing, collapsing everything here. When your oil's been infusing for a good long while, which is anywhere between 4 to 8 weeks and beyond, if you're working with dried plant matter, you don't really have to worry about forgetting about it. It doesn't matter if you forgot about it, other than if it's like a year or more old, you've probably kind of like lost the potency some. But like you could be like, oh shit, it's been 3 months. If that happens with a wilted or a fresh plant matter infusion, it's probably going to be moldy and rancid and all that kind of stuff. But if it's dry plant matter, you're like, just sat a long time, and then you can just strain it out. I do recommend finding a way to smash it. Even if you've just filled it like this and you're twisting it, something. Because a lot of oil will be stored in that plant matter, and arguably that oil in itself is a little bit more potent than the oil that you've strained out with ease. Plus, you'll lose a lot of oil. I know a lot of you have watched my Instagram stories, like if I don't press something, like I've showed you like how much I get out before I press, and then I'll press, like if I'm making like a 5-gallon batch of infused oil, if I don't press that, I only end up with like 3.5 gallons of oil, depending on how much herb is in the bucket. And then if I press it, I end up with like 4.5 gallons. With tincture, sometimes I end up with the exact amount that I put in, you know, because you're not losing it, because you can press this oil out in some way. And there's so many options on Amazon. You can just don't buy a tincture press. They're expensive. Buy a fruit press, something you twist. Buy a hydraulic press and turn it into something. You could also probably even put up an ad on your local Facebook Marketplace or Craigslist or somewhere like that looking to buy a small tabletop hydraulic press that's used. You might be able to throw somebody $20 for one of these things. You know, give it a good scrub down and clean it and find a way to press things out. And it's so easy. Okay, so I talked about straining, talked about heating. I think I'm ready to do questions. So I haven't been able to see your guys' chatter this entire time, so for all I know, shit's going crazy in the comment section. There could be horrendous trolls. I don't know what I'm stepping into, but let me take a drink here and we'll figure it out together. Okay, so I'm gonna turn, wait, I'm gonna figure out live chat. Okay, I see everything here. Oh yeah, so after, yeah, see, questions that I wouldn't see. So after you've infused your oil, those plants are spent. Meaning there's nothing really left for them to give, and you can compost them, or you can toss them. There's not really anything else that you can do with them. If you compost them, I really suggest that you make a separate compost from your normal one, because the oil in these infused plants make it take longer to break down, and so it'll take like a year or two to break down fully compared to normal compost. So you don't want to mix that in with your active compost. Just make its own compost pile. I have one where I compost all of my oil submerged herbs, and then I have one where I compost all of like my water-based like tinctures and things like that. Okay. So yeah, I'll be saving this video for everybody to rewatch. So I'm going to pull this a little closer. Okay, I am going to answer questions as I see them, and because I'm saving this as a video, and on the video it won't show all the live comments rolling, I'm going to read your question out loud, and then, you know, people will know what the hell I'm talking about. Let's see, so if you have, okay, I'm only going to answer questions about oils. Okay, if you have questions about infused oils, throw them at me. Okay, so Emily Miller asked, can you use rose hips from any rose bush, or should you harvest from a specific kind of rose bush? A rose is a rose is a rose is a rose. They're perfectly fine to use for infused oils or teas or whatever you want to make with them. You just have to make sure that it's not contaminated, right? Like in a lot of like rose gardens, people use like heavy pesticides and stuff because they don't want the petals being chewed up. But if you're out in the wild, or you've just got some crazy roses growing in your backyard, you're just fine. So let's see, E. Marie asks, I've heard you say how you buy some of your herbs in bulk. How can I know which online places are selling truly fresh herbs? No online place is going to be selling fresh herbs. Well, some places will ship you fresh herbs, but as far as like how old their herbs are, ask them. Ask them, you know, I'm interested in buying this. When was it packaged? How recent is your current lot? So they have to disclose that if you ask it. They don't have to put it on the package if they don't want to, because technically an herb is considered an ingredient, and so they don't have to put like a best by date on it because it's used. So Lisa D asked me, I'm interested in your cayenne powder. Do you treat it the same way as dried herbs? Yep, treat it the same way as dried herbs, except for when you're working with it, I want you to remember to wash your hands, potentially wear a mask, and dump it really slow because it wants to puff up. You could also use just dried cayenne peppers if you don't want to work with the powder. Okay, so let's see. That bug got me good. Tasha Bassing, and if I pronounce your name wrong, I'm sorry, asked, other than St. John's wort, what plants do you use fresh or wilted to make an infused oil? Honestly, for me personally, that's the only one I use that way. Sometimes if I'm using a plant that's particularly stemmy, like it's got a big, almost made a dick symbol. It's got a big stem on it. I will make sure to split those down the middle. But I won't wait till they're completely dry, because what happens is by the time that is dry, the leaf and stuff might be too dry. So I definitely will use some stuff that way. It's hit or miss, but usually it's pretty damn close to dry. Like, it's closer to dry than not. But St. John's wort is really the only one that I use that way. Okay, let's see. I saw somebody say question. Off-grid Grammy asks if Mullein would make a good oil infusion or no. Yeah, I actually have a video on my YouTube here where I show you how to make an earache oil, and Mullein is used in that, the Mullein leaf. But some people also use her leaves and or her roots actually to make an infused oil for like joint pain and stuff like that. Let's see. I'm just gonna scroll. Oh, I can scroll. Let's see. Let me go. So somebody asks about tallow. I can't. Oh, where can I get tallow? You can look for organic tallow online. You can look for grass-fed farmers in your area where they sell, like, you know, their animals are pastured. Generally, I've seen some on Etsy before. If you don't want to make it yourself, it's definitely easier to buy it. Eventually, I need to do a how to render tallow video, because there's so much misinformation out there about using just a crock pot to melt down fat and then calling it tallow. That's not how you make tallow. It's not shelf-stable either. But you can definitely find tallow online or locally. Let me see. Let me scroll down here. Let's see. How do you know herbs dried at home are fully dry and ready to infuse? Check out my How to Cure Herbs video here on YouTube. But then what you'll really want to do is, you don't really want it to go to powder, but you should be able to break it with pretty much ease. If it's still bendy and you tear it more than you snap it, then you know that it's not cured enough to use in an infused oil. But if you're using something like comfrey or mullein that has like a thick vein, oh man, my mind is just rampant with dick jokes every time I talk about it. That's why I can't talk with y'all publicly, because I see if it has a big vein, a big stem running down the middle of it, you want to cut that stem in half to allow it to let moisture out more, because what will happen is the leaf portion of the plant will be nice and cured and dry, but inside of the stem there will still be moisture. Let's see. When is the Emily Miller asks, when is the best time to harvest rose hips? I like to wait until, if you live somewhere where you get frost, wait until it gets a good hard frost and they're kind of wrinkly looking. By then they'll have almost quadruple the amount of ascorbic acid, which is vitamin C, and a lot of other nutrients, because the plant like pushes it all into there. Nancy K, I think this is Nancy. Nancy K asks, with oils, you need to add anything so it doesn't spoil, i.e., like example, like vitamin E. Not really. And vitamin E actually, that's a misconception. People think vitamin E acts like a preservative, but really what it is, it's an antioxidant, and it just like extends the shelf life of the oil a little longer sometimes if you have a high quality one. But it doesn't prevent any type of like rancidity. Well, it might help prevent rancidity, because that's more of a matter of the oil getting old, but it won't help prevent like bacterial growth or anything like that. Unfortunately, there's no real thing you can do beyond using dried plant matter and just keeping an eye on it to keep it from going bad. You could, if you really wanted to, and I personally wouldn't do this, you can find an oil-soluble preservative to add to it. I experimented a long time ago with that when using fresh plant matter to make an infusion, to see if it would stop the spoilage, and it didn't. I think what happens is there's just too much of a bacterial load, or you'd have to use a ridiculous amount of preservative. Okay, let's see. Any tips for a beginner, someone who messes things up quickly? Just accept the fact that you're going to fuck some things up. and go easy on yourself for messing up, because it's okay. It's okay for things not to turn out, and ultimately allow yourself to learn from that. Like, you better believe I've made some mistakes. I've made some mistakes working with herbs and things like that. I'm like, well, that didn't work, but now you know. So you have to be brave enough to fail, because if you're not brave enough to fail, then you won't be brave enough to move forward. Right, like don't be too afraid and too hard on yourself. Okay. Let's see. I did the same thing. Okay, let's see. So a crock pot for infused oils is not okay. I mean, if you're just looking to catch the scent, yeah, or unless you're willing to leave it plugged in for a really long time, you're really just wasting plant material and oil and a little bit of electricity, because it's not infusing long enough that you're catching any of the medicinal properties. It's not in there long enough to break down that cellular structure of the plant matter. And if you get it too hot, because all these crock pots, even on their keep warm setting, they're like pretty close to above 100 degrees. Remember how I said I don't really want my hot box to go over like 110 degrees? You start getting above that and you start really killing off a lot of the herbal properties that you've infused. Okay. So, Stradivarius asks olive oil. Yes, opinion. I don't like olive oil personally. Most of the time, if you're living in the U.S. anyhow, when you buy olive oil, it's actually been cut with a lot of other nasty oils like safflower oil, canola oil, things that are nice and rancid. And olive oil, in my personal experience when I used to work with it, it goes rancid really fast, and I think that has a lot to do with the higher amounts of protein in it, because they're pressing it from the olives, and especially virgin olive oil, because she's got even more of these literally plant particles that are fresh in there. And I just noticed that she goes just bad a lot faster. It's okay to work with olive oil. I just would never work with olive oil with fresh plant matter. And again, you might make an infused oil with fresh or wilted plant matter with olive oil, and it turns out okay, right? And you're like, oh, this is great. And then you like bottle it up and you give it out or this or that, and then like within like 3 to 4 months it's rancid, or it's got bacteria in it, you know. And this bacteria can really cause problems. It can cause skin issues, it can cause infections, it can cause some pretty scary stuff. Okay. Can I make a tincture I made with Everclear to your infused oil? No. So that falls under the same thing of what we can add to an oil. You cannot add anything that's water, even though alcohol, you know, Everclear is like 190 proof, which means it's like 95% alcohol. It's still water-based. Alcohol is still a water-soluble thing, so it can't mix. It cannot mix with your oil unless you're using an emulsification process. And even then, that's a whole like process on your stove temp of like bringing everything up to the same temperature, having all these emulsification waxes, and then combining them perfectly, and then it can still separate on you if you're not pretty experienced with it. So anything that's water soluble, you just can't add. If it's water, you just can't add it to an oil. So you can, so Tara Howard asked a good amount of stuff about goldenrod, like how to use it to help with RA and as a diuretic. With that, you can go check out my goldenrod videos. I talk about her quite a bit on there. So that would help you get some understanding of how to use it for that. You can use a goldenrod as an oil. Some people infuse her for like stiff joints and things like that. So I already answered the one, how do you know when your herb is dry enough and are too dry? Okay, so too dry is, Mary McGrath asked, how do you know when your herb is dry enough and not too dry? So that's definitely where my how to cure herbs video will come in, because really what it is curing is where you're pulling out the moisture with the dehumidifier versus relying on heat or evaporation. And I really like to use that process. I really suggest it. You can get dehumidifiers for so cheap. Little tiny one, you know, like a little desk mode for like $10, and pull out the moisture from your plants instead of relying on the heat or the evaporation. But it's too dry if it powders easy. Like if you can just like turn it into dust, it's way too dry. And then with moist, you still want to be able to break it, but you don't want to have to be able to tear it or pull. And you can even just roll this plant between your finger, and if you feel moisture, if you can squeeze moisture out, if it feels moist, if it's not kind of breaking up, then it's not dry enough. Let's see. Does rosemary have to be dried before an oil infusion, is what Colors of Soul are asked. It doesn't have to be. It comes down to a personal preference. I like to use, when plants have high volatile oils like that, like the lavender or rosemary has a high scent to it, I really like to use them dried because I want to break down that little tougher cellular oil barrier that it has, and I feel like a longer infusion is better. You can use fresh rosemary though, just follow the guidelines of probably making sure that you strip all of the leaves off of the stem, and then don't add the stem. The stem will have a lot of moisture, and let it sit out for like 2 or 3 days so it's lost a lot of moisture. But rosemary kind of falls along the lines of like when I'm working with pine or something like that. They tend to hold a lot of moisture within these these needles or these leaves that they have, and so I like when it's all the way dry because I know that there's not any sneaky moisture hiding within it, because a pine needle can seem dry and then you break it open and it's still pretty moist. Same as rosemary. Okay. Lost in Thought asks, at what temp are we destroying the medicinal properties? So you could dive into like a whole nuanced like science-based paper, because unfortunately every property within a plant is different and will have a different level where heat destroys it, right? But generally I try to keep, when I'm actively infusing something, below 110 or below. Around 115, 120 is where it really starts to degrade. And then after you take the plant matter out, it's kind of interesting because it might not have as big of an opportunity to degrade when you're using it with heats. Like if you're making, and let's say a body oil or a lotion where you have to bring your temperatures up higher. And sometimes what I do with that, if I'm making something that I'm going to be using in a lotion or a cream that takes a lot of heat, what I'll do is I'll make the infusion twice as strong, meaning I will add twice as much of a plant to an oil that I normally would. That way, when I do have to bring it up to a little bit higher of a temp, the odds of me killing it all off are a lot lower versus if there's not as much, right? Like it's survival by number, by amount, Okay. So let's see. Oh, the same hydraulic press I talked about. Yeah, you just need to find a way to put a pot in there that you can, and I have a big pot that I've used to where I took like a big cooking pot and I drilled a hole in the bottom of it, right? And then I put a downspout, I connected a spout. That way when I press with my bigger press, I can just open the valve and it'll come out. You could do the same thing with a small pot and just put the valve on the front of it. That way when you press it comes out. Or you could just stick a tube in that and like use some food grade epoxy or something so it doesn't come out around the tube. Anything like that would work. Let's see. Dacia64 says, when do I cut my fresh catnip that I've grown in my yard to make it out an oil or a salve? Whenever you want. Generally before the leaves start going yellow with fall. I like to get her fresh in the spring personally because she's got way more volatile oils in her because she's really concentrating on that. But once she starts blooming, all of those oils are really concentrated into her bloom, so it's okay to use that too. Brittany Ventura asks, if we make this infused oil you put together, how do you suggest we use it? Once we strain it, how do we store it? Do we use a preservative? So the thing is, if you're not using fresh plant matter, you don't need to add a preservative because oil, it can't grow bacteria and it can't grow mold and it can't grow fungus unless there's water present. It can go rancid, but there's not really a whole lot you can do about that, and it usually takes a year or two, and you'll know when it goes rancid because it'll fucking smell like death. On that note, stop putting essential oils in your body oils and stuff for so many reasons, but one of the main reasons is they smell so strong because they're extracted in really potent volatile organic compounds out of the plant that you can't smell when something's gone rancid. And I've actually seen well-known herbalists say that if something goes rancid, don't worry about it because you won't have to smell it if you add XYZ essential oils. And she's like, we can just church it up a little bit. And I'm like, oh my God. Don't do that. You're hiding that something went bad. If something goes rancid and it smells horrendous, like it usually smells like old rotten fish or like those potatoes you forgot about in your cupboard. Don't put something in that to cover up the smell. It's bad. Toss it out and start again. But generally, like it won't grow. It can't grow bacteria because the oil just isn't conducive to it for bacteria or fungus or yeast unless there's water present in it. That's another reason why I really only like to work with dried plant matter. Let's see. Becky Yates asks, do you put the pine pitch in all oil infusions? Only if I'm using it. Like, it depends on what you're making. So, like, if I'm making something that I don't want to use pine pitch in, I just don't put that in there. But yeah, pine pitch is great to be infused into oil. You just need that little bit of heat and some time and some patience, and slowly it'll completely erode down into it. Gail Marshall asked, do I only press the dry or wet herb as well? You only press if you're going to make an oil infusion and you're going to use like fresh or freshly wilted plants. Do not press it. Just let it drip out. You can just sit it over a sieve or a strainer or something like that and just let it drip for the day or a couple days with a towel over it, because if you press that, the moisture that's in the plant will go into your oil, and you'll see it in the bottom there, because oil will be on top, and so you'll have these little molecules of water blobbed up onto the bottom of your oil, and that is not a matter of if it goes bad, it's just when. So it'll go faster for sure. Sometimes what you can do if you end up having that happen is let it settle and then slowly strain off, and then because this jar has a lip, sometimes it'll catch the water and you just stop right there, right? You might have oil up in the bottom, but then that water at least has somewhat been removed from your oil. Oh shit, I scroll up real fast. Okay, let me find where I went to. Okay, went too far now. Let me find where I'm at. Okay, so what are the best herbs to grow for beginners? That depends on where you live and what you want to use. Comfrey's a good one. She is, wherever you plant her, decide that's where you want her, because she will come back forever in that place. Calendula's a nice, easy one. Maybe start, instead of, if you already have a garden in an area, instead of thinking about what you can plant, think about getting to know all the weeds that are growing out there, because a lot of them have medicinal properties, and you can get to know them, and then you can add things in too. So I don't use a dehumidifier. So Rachel TK asked, can you show me or tell me the name of your dehumidifier? I don't use that. Oh wait, I was thinking of a dehydrator. I do use a dehumidifier. I don't actually know the name of it. I just, my reading skills are top notch. I just get them off of Amazon. They're little $10 one forever. I used to have this massive one, and this next summer I'm going to be building like a very specific like little building that's meant for like dehydrating. Not fucking Christ, dehumidifying herbs, and I will definitely show that process for sure. But any dehumidifier will do. They all do the same thing. Brand doesn't really matter. You can read reviews, but little small ones are $10-20. They just do the same thing. They pull water out of the air. Okay, so I get my hemp buds from Horn Creek Farm, a place here in Oregon. I think that's the name of it, Horn Creek Farm. But you can just Google hemp buds online. In this day and age, you can just buy them anywhere, and they just mail them to you. Definitely look at the reviews that they have for like quality. Ask them about last season. Like right now, just so you know, it's October, so it's harvest season. So anything that they have ready, unless it was grown in like light depth situations, which is where like they're tricking it to be done sooner, you're buying last year's outdoor. And you want to be like, do you have any sales? Because what you're selling me right now is like a year old and you're harvesting right now. Or you can wait for about probably, I guess, a month, 2 weeks to a month, and they'll be selling you the fresh stuff, and their old stuff will probably be discounted. Okay, so let's see. Boho Rustica asked, which oil lasts the longest before going rancid? I personally, let me just start by saying a disclaimer that I've not done any type of like advanced like studying like double blind stuff in the lab, so somebody might come at me being like, you don't know. But like for me personally, the one that I've worked with out of about 5 or 10 that I've worked with over the years that goes rancid like the least is avocado oil, and the fastest one has always been olive oil. It's always been olive oil. Generally when I first started like really like sharing my oils with people about, what is it, like 8 years ago now, or maybe a little less than that, 6-7 years, trying to do math in my head, I would make an infused oil even with dry plant matter, and within like 6 months it would have gone rancid. And so I did a little bit of research and I switched over to avocado oil, and that definitely helped that a lot. Okay, so Quantum Gypsy, and this is a common misconception. She says, I've heard you, or I don't know if it's she, they say, I've heard you say you prefer fresh plant matter over dried, but doesn't seem like that is your opinion today. What's the deal? The deal is you're listening to me make a tincture. And this is an oil infusion. When I make a tincture, I only work with fresh plant matter. I mean, there might be some roots or such that I work with that are dried, or mushrooms, but particularly I'm going to use fresh plant matter when I use a tincture, and that's different than an oil infusion. So I don't like to use fresh plant matter when I'm making an oil infusion, but I'm a huge advocate for, if you're making a tincture, you use fresh plant matter, and that's because you want to get the water soluble properties out of the plant when you're making a tincture, and that's what alcohol does. But because you can't like scientifically use oil to extract the water soluble properties of a plant, because oil and water don't combine, I use dried plant material when I'm using when I'm making an oil infusion. So it's not that I'm changing my mind suddenly, it's two different processes. Okay, so let's see. How do you know if a plant's water-soluble properties dissipate more rapidly after harvest? So it doesn't, if you're working with an oil, right, it doesn't really matter if the water-soluble properties are going to disappear after you harvest, because you're not going to be able to catch it in the oil anyways. But with some plants, it's a matter of looking on like a deeper level of like what their terpenes are. Like one example is like skullcap. Skullcap loses like 85% or something like that. Like, I don't have the exact number in my mind, but it's a pretty high percent of her medicinal properties within an hour of cutting. It's crazy. And it all comes down to the specific terpene. So a lot of that loops back into like getting to know like each individual plant on a deeper level. Like lavender is going to have a different answer than like cleavers will, right? A lot of people, I'm not saying that this person did this, but a lot of people, when they start getting into herbalism, they're looking for a set answer that covers everything. When it comes to like why one plant does something or something different, you really have to be looking at that individual plant like on a personal level. Like, why does she act this way? What properties does she have that are going to like disappear on me? Do I know about this? And also like PubMed, fucking say that word, is your friend. They're dry, draining, scientific stuff, but these people typically have like a summary on the bottom if you don't feel like reading it all, and you can dive deep into the terpenes about which plant does what, and if it's water soluble or oil soluble, and you can even just find the name of the terpene that's in the plant, like what are the terpenes that are in lavender, and then you could just take the name of the terpene, and then you could Google, is blah 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 terpene water soluble or oil soluble, and it might be either or, it could be both, it could be not one or the other, and it's really, really interesting stuff to dive in on a deeper level like that. Okay, so Julia Flanor asks, is olive oil a good choice for mint? When I pick an oil, it doesn't really have to do which plant I'm working with. It's just my choice of oil that I've decided to work with. And so I wouldn't say that olive oil is good or bad for mint in the way that I wouldn't say it's good or bad for cleavers. It comes down to a personal choice of why you want to use that oil. Probably out of all the oils that I rally against, I don't like olive oil personally, because she goes rancid really easy, and in America anyhow, she's really adulterated. She's cut with other oils. It's pretty rampant. You can read about it online about like how like most olive oil on the shelves in America has other oils added to it, so you're paying this higher price for olive oil, but like it's not even necessarily olive oil or 100% olive oil. Let me take a drink here. All right. Let's see. Risa Pieces, I like that, asked, would knotweed root be good for an infused oil? Yeah, a lot of people like to use knotweed in infused oils, and so you can really dive into making an infused oil with these plants that you're curious about. I've never worked with the root personally, or even a whole lot of knotweed, because she's not really growing extensively where I'm at. So like that's a matter of like, well, what are the properties of a knotweed root? What have people traditionally used her for? What is my goal here? And if you like what you read, then yeah, make an oil out of it. And that's back to the part of getting you guys to be curious about what you're using, you know, and like have a firm idea in your mind of why you're choosing to use it. Like, why do I want to use this plant, and why do I think she'd be good in an infused oil, and you know, all these kind of things. It just helps you be creative. Okay. I already answered that one. Casey M asked, can you use wild lettuce to make an infused oil? You know, I bet you could. Although the problem with wild lettuces is that they're called lactones. It's a thing that helps with pain and stuff. Is they tend to dissipate when dried. So she might actually be one that if you're going to work with, just like St. John's wort, that you have to use her pretty fresh if you want to catch those lactones. But you know what? I'm not sure if they're oil soluble. So you would have to look in to see if those particular properties of her are oil soluble. And if they're not, it's probably pointless because it won't transfer over into the oil. Okay. Do you need to do anything different if you make a rock rose infusion due to the resins? So one thing that's really cool about oil, have y'all ever got like pine pitch, some people call it tree sap, on your hands and it's really sticky, right? It's because pine pitch has a lot of resin in her. She's basically a big ball of resin, terpenes and other things like that. And if you take that oil, or maybe some of you have, let me find it. I can't find nothing. I don't know where she went. Or if you've trimmed a bunch of weed before, or hemp or whatever, and your fingers are real sticky, that's from resin. And in all instances, if you have something that's really sticky from a plant on your fingers, oil is going to help you get that off. It'll strip it right off like you're using soap and water, because the oil actually gets into the resins and breaks them open and basically like coats them on like a molecular like little level, and then you can wash them away. So when you're using something like pine pitch or rock rose or something that has like a lot of resin in it in an oil, the trick is low and slow and long heat, and what will happen is that oil will break down those resins into itself. So yeah, oil is a really great choice for plants that are super resinous. Just give them time. That pine pitch that I put in that jar, earlier in the video, it'll probably take at least 4 weeks or more for it to be like halfway dissolved, probably 8 weeks max for it to be like completely melded in, and I can shake it up and I don't see the pine pitch. And I suggest waiting for that to happen, because getting pine pitch out of your jar is a pain in the ass when it's done. But if you let it melt all the way, there's nothing stuck to the bottom. Although one trick is to use more oil, or you can use, actually the only thing that I use grain alcohol for is to strip pitch off of things, not my hands because it's so drying. But if you ever want to see how terrifying it is to just use grain alcohol, dump that on there. And grain alcohol doesn't mean it's made with grains, it means that it's 195 proof, like 95% alcohol. It'll strip that pitch in a matter of minutes. Just crazy. But yeah, oil is a really good choice for things that are pretty resinous. Okay. Gma Koch asks, is comfrey a good oil infusion plant? How long do you wait for it to be ready to use? So comfrey is a really good plant to make an infusion with, but I beg you, use it dried. She has so much protein in her. It's not if she'll make it go rancid, she will make it go rancid. So many people are like, I tried to make my first oil infusion with comfrey and it smells like there's a dead mouse in the jar. It's she just is notorious for making oils go rancid. So make sure she's really dry. And usually you're going to want to let your oil sit between 4 to 8 weeks in a warm, dark place. The longer the better. Honestly, when I'm using dried plant matter, I really like to get to the above 6 week point. Like if you can wait for 2 months, and you can pull off in the meantime if you need to, like take some oil out before you strain it all the way, it's really gonna pay off with a nice potent infused oil. Okay, let's see. Tina Mina asks, what can be used before one gets a press, please? Well, you can dump it into a strainer with like some cheesecloth or something and just let it drip for a few days. You can try to bag it up, like put it in the bag and like really twist it with your hands. You could probably set something heavy on top of your oil in your strainer to help it go out further. But really the drip method is probably the best way because it just, gravity does the work for you. It just might take 2 or 3 days and you'll probably still lose a little bit of the oil. Okay. Let's see. Let me keep on scrolling down. Other than cannabis, are there other herbs that have to be decarbed? Is what Jeeves Winston asks. I don't think so. Let me say, I don't know. Because there are so many plants in the world that it's really possible that there's something else. But generally, when we're decarbing cannabis or hemp, we're doing that to turn the CBGA or the THCA into, or CBD, I said CBG, I was reading about CBGs the other day, CBD or THC, and that's where it turns those particular terpenes and things into an accessible to our body form, right? And so, I'm really not sure if there are other herbs. There probably are, but that's pretty specific for CBD and THC, but there might be other plants. There really might be other plants that have different things that you need to like heat activate and things like that. Mushrooms, although you don't have to decarb them, which is where you're popping them in the oven, they need hot water, alcohol, and like time to extract. Like you can make a mushroom tincture, but if you don't then like boil down those mushrooms, you take them out of the tincture and you boil it down in water, you'll lose a lot of their hot water soluble properties. So there are definitely herbs and other things that probably need different processes, but I don't know if they would specifically need decarbing being put into the oven. Okay, let's see. Laura Jean asked, does refrigeration extend infused oil shelf life? It can, but don't be alarmed. Like if you're using avocado oil or something like that, it will go cloudy. Like cold temperatures tend to make oils go cloudy. And so one tip to know is that mold never shakes back in, and mold doesn't change if it becomes room temperature a little bit warm. So sometimes, and I get this a lot because I use a lot of like herbs and things like that in my infused oils, and they have little powder and pieces on them, and you'll strain it through your mesh strainer, your nut milk bag, whatever. But eventually over time, if I give you like a bottle of something and it's been sitting for a long while, eventually these little tiny particles will all like come together in the bottom, and people are like, it molded. I'm like, it can't mold because there's no water present. But what happens is if you shake it and it dissipates, it's not mold. If you shake it and it stays clumpy, it's mold, right? Because mold won't shake back in. Plant matter will. So if you take your oil out of the fridge and it warms up and you see some clumpy stuff and, or it looks kind of like milky colored or like cloudy, and it warms up and that doesn't go away, and it should look kind of stringy if it's moldy or like big clumps. It usually likes to grow on the bottom or on the side of the jar. But you can definitely keep it in the fridge. Just keep an eye on that and know the difference between what's mold and what's plant matter that's settled. And if I heat this back up and I pour it back into a jar, does it like go clear again, right? There's nothing you can do as far as other than straining out mold that will make these mold colonies like go away. So they'll always be present. But you can't, sometimes when I'm making like an infused St. John's wort oil, I will make sure that I keep that in a really cool dark place, and I have a little apothecary fridge here. Sometimes I put the whole 5-gallon bucket after I've strained it in the bottom of the fridge, because I know that I've only got so long, and that cold slows down bacterial or fungal growth and things like that. Okay. So Stephen Walker asked, would you say elderberry, rose hips, and hawthorn would make a good, it's a tincture question. Almost got me there. I don't make blended tincture. I make single tinctures. That way, if I have a reaction for the good or the bad, I know what caused it. Especially if you've got a bad reaction to something, you don't have to then figure out which plant made you feel sick. You know exactly which one did it. Okay. Okay, that's a good question, even though eventually I'm going to do the next class I'm going to do after this is teaching you how to make a salve and balms out of this. Amy Malady, sorry if I said that wrong, asked if Carnauba wax, basically she's looking for vegan wax alternatives, and personally I don't work with them. In all honesty, most of them are created unethically. A lot of them promote deforestation and things like that. And the funny thing is even if you're vegan with bees, when you buy from an ethical source, when you support an ethical beekeeper, you're actually supporting your own diet, because if you're not supporting the bee farmer, because just to be clear, in America, honeybees aren't native. They're not from here. We do have native pollinators, but not honeybees. And these honeybees are directly responsible for pollinating all the vegetable crops that you're eating year round. And so if you're supporting an ethical bee farmer, and these bees are happy, they're well taken care of, there are regulations that mean they have to take care of them in a specific way if you have more than a certain amount of hives. And I'm speaking as a little bit of a beekeeper myself. You're not harming them to take the wax. It's not harming them. They don't take too much. And again, you're supporting your own diet by making sure that these pollinators are out there, right? And if we support an ethical beekeeper that has good practices, we know that we are supporting these little creatures that we care about. But yeah, you can look into vegan options for wax. I would just make sure that you do a good amount of research, because again, a lot of them really aren't made ethically in the way that they promote deforestation and exploitation of third world countries and stuff like that, where they're getting these sources of them from. A lot of them stem from trees and particular plants and things like that they're having to harvest in large amounts. Okay, so what bags do you use to strain oil-infused herbs is what Daryl Johnson asked. I like to use they just call them nut milk bags, but any nylon mesh food grade bag will do the trick. I love these. I love them over cotton any day of the week because they're so reusable for a really long time. You can sanitize them. You can scrub them with soap and water. You can boil them. And cotton really hangs on to oil. And so you might think you've gotten all the oil out of that, but you really haven't. Whereas you can take a nylon bag and you can scrub it really good, and then you can soak it into rubbing alcohol or something like that, and it'll strip anything else that's there, and then give it a good rinse, and it's sanitized. So I really like the nylon. They call them nut milk bags on Amazon. Okay. So Daisha64 is asking about the crock pot thing again. I really don't suggest making infused oils in a crock pot. You can rewatch this to hear me rant about it, but it's a waste of oil, it's a waste of electricity, and you're not really getting any of them, you're not getting any, what is that damn word? I'm tired, it's been 2 hours. You're not getting any realistic amount of medicinal properties or anything like that from it. Tora Rogers asked about our grapeseed and sunflower seed oils okay to use. I would probably, if I had to pick one of the two, I would work with grapeseed over sunflower seed, because sunflower seed has it's rancid before you buy it. They've just used chemicals and heat processes to remove the smell of it. One thing that's really interesting to go look at for oils, as far as even eating, is check out the Weston Price Foundation. They have a whole list of good oils versus bad oils. And while we're talking about stuff we're going to be using on our skin, it is kind of worth looking at because your skin is the biggest organ and you do absorb the stuff transdermally, and it can kind of help you narrow down like what you may or may not want to use on your skin. And a lot of the oils like canola or sunflower and things like that typically are rancid before you buy them. They've just used a process to strip away that smell for you, and it's pretty gross stuff. But I would probably pick grapeseed oil if you're reading the grapeseed oil and you think that that would work good for what you're trying to formulate in your particular type of skin. Again, it comes down to like choosing based on like reading about it, like what we think it would be good for us. That way we take our creativity into our own hands. Okay. It keeps scrolling down on me. Let me jump all the way to the bottom. Okay, so let's see. Steve Wander asks, if you can't live heat, I live in a van and have limited power supply. Could I use fresh plant matter for any herb, keep on a cool and dark spot for 6 weeks, or could I just let it dry plant matter sit longer? Yeah, you could use the fresh plant matter. Just definitely keep an eye on it, but you could also use the dry plant matter and just really let it sit longer. And then if you're able to, depending on where the heat vents are in your van, while you're driving around, if you have your heat on, if you're using the dry plant matter, stick it over the heat vent, right? And if it's still warmer where you're at, like if you live in a southern climate maybe, you could totally wrap it in something so the sun doesn't hit it, and then sit it in your dashboard, right? Anywhere the sun's going to hit, that's going to act like a heat box anyways. Okay. Angela G says, question, what do you have inside the hydraulic press bowls? I always have to rig up the top so that the press meets the herbs to the press. Hold on, let me go find it. Let me, actually here, just come with me. Come let me dig and find where this thing is at. When I bought, I think it's right in here. When I bought my little fruit press thing, it came with, it came with this. So I'm able to just take, here's my press. Imagine I have a bag that fits it all the way. And then this goes inside of the press. And then when I pump this down onto it, it actually, this shit was just pure luck. It fits right into that. It fits perfectly into it. And that was just, that was really just pure luck. And let me flip you back around. That was luck. And so, but you can use anything, you want to use something, hold on. You want to use something that is food grade for sure. But you could find yourself like a little stainless steel disc or plate, or it needs to have, ow, fucking took my ankle out with the chair. It needs to have a good amount of girth to it, like thickness, because what'll happen is while it's pressing down your plant matter, if it's not strong enough, it's just gonna bend the metal, because this is a 6-ton hydraulic ram, which isn't really all that much, really. It's a tiny little press. But that means there could be 6 tons of pressure pushing down. And so you want to make sure that it's something nice and stable. Okay, let's see. Why would you make, okay, so Nancy Lafferty asked, why would you make an oil infusion versus just using the herb as a tea alone for, say, arthritis? Well, that comes down to, do you want to use something topically? There's no rule that says you can't if it's safe to use internally, like comfrey, right? Well, there's some debate on that. Like hybrid comfrey, don't at me. So let's say you want to drink a comfrey infusion to help with your arthritis. Cool, yeah, that can probably help. But also you can make a comfrey infused oil and use it topically. And so there's no real rule that says one over the other. You could do both, and really just deciding on how you want to use it, but also like asking yourself, is it safe for me to use this herb internally? And if it's not, because I might be on, like, let's say medications, or something like that, maybe you need to use it topically. Now, some people ask me that question, like St. John's wort, for example. She really tends to interfere with medications in our body by, really what she does is she speeds up your liver and processes out the chemicals that are in your bloodstream too fast, and all things go wrong. But Can you use her externally? Yeah, yeah. I mean, you are absorbing it, but like you would really have to be like taking a fucking bath in like St. John's wort oil or something like that before you absorbed enough transdermally that it would interfere with medication. So there's a lot of reasons why you could choose to use an oil over just drinking a tea. But again, it could be either or. It just depends on your personal preference and what's going on with your individual body. Okay. Let's see. So Daisha asked about when I am mixing up oils, I'm concerned about what wax to use for salves. Just use beeswax. I love beeswax. She's my best friend. I use a lot of her. And then my next class is going to be on making balms and salves, and I'm hopeful that'll be in the next like week or two, probably. So Roma Crane asked if I refrigerate my herbal infused oils. I don't generally, unless it's something that I've used, like I talked about the St. John's wort oil being popped in the fridge. So that's a tincture question. Shining My Light asked, do you have to worry about oxidation with infused oils after straining? A little bit will happen, but not really. Generally, oxidation occurs in oil a little bit differently than it does in like a tincture, for instance. In oil, the plant matter itself is oxidizing more than the oil is. So you do want to make sure that your plant matter is completely submerged under oil. That will help. But afterwards, you don't really notice it happen a whole lot because the plant matter has been removed. Whereas a tincture, because there's water present, it's water soluble, they will get a little darker over time from oxidation. Especially if you're keeping them in jars that are like, that much tincture and that much oxygen, But always when I store my oils, typically, unless I'm going to use it up right away within like a month or so, if I'm storing it long term, I do make sure that I've filled my jar all the way up with the oil that I've already like strained out, so I prevent a bit of oxidation. That one fly, it's fly season here. We have all the appropriate like fly getters and zappers and things, and there's just like these two flies, and I'm like, I've been coming at them with a vacuum and like a fly swatter trying to get them, and they're bugging me like crazy. Okay. Gail Marshall wants to know, in your opinion, what animal tallow is best to use. I never knew. Tallow is tallow, really. It's just fat that's been rendered from a red meat animal. The more important thing versus type is versus how that animal is treated. You want to make sure that it's grass-fed if possible. It's not coming off of a feedlot. You're not supporting like unethical treatment of animals that way, but also you're making sure that like really good tallow. See how that has a yellow color to it? If it's not grass-fed. Now, eventually, if I render this again and I like warm it up and cool it down, the yellow will go away. But like the yellow is a really good indication that animal, this is deer fat, lived its life eating grass. And around here, what's funny is like, oh, wild meat. I'm like, yeah, our wild meat is loving those alfalfa fields. So it's grass-fed in the way that it eats it eats grass, but also it's like in a lot of fields eating food. The condition of how the animal is treated is almost more important than the type of animal that made the tallow, right? And I want to put out there that lard is not tallow. They act differently on our skin. Lard isn't bad, but it's not similar to our type of fat because pigs aren't red meat animals, and so it's a little harder to soak into your skin. Whereas tallow will just be drink right up. Okay, let's see. I just had deja vu. Amy Maladry asks, is it not okay to infuse oil near a sunny window? And no, I covered that. You really don't want to use sun to infuse oils because it really degrades the medicinal properties. Even though it gets color really fast, the UV rays just destroy it. But you can cover the jar. You can cover the jar in some like fabric or whatever, or slip a sock over it and sit it in the window to utilize the heat without destroying the medicinal properties of your plant and your oil. Let's see. I'm just scrolling through here. Angela Ambrose asks if I can infuse aloe vera and avocado. Yeah, you can infuse aloe vera into avocado oil, and it'll definitely work that way. But because aloe is very water heavy, you want to make sure that it's really well dried. You can also look into, they sell like aloe vera powder, and just make sure it's from a good source, and you could work that into your oil. It's probably not oil soluble, so you'd want to shake it up, and that would probably help it. But it would be a good choice to add to like salves and balms, because the beeswax would help suspend the powder, right? So it's always there, you're not having to shake it. So that is an option. Deborah Rudolph says, please create an herbal school. I would pay you good money for you to teach me. Well, now that you mention it, I will never charge you to learn from me, because it just goes against a lot of like personal and like cultural beliefs of mine. But I have been working tirelessly. That's why I look haggard, for like the past 5 years, to open up our free hands-on herbalism farm called Dinner Still Needs Cooking here on our property that we bought last November. Well, really December is when we got to move in, but and everything happened. So right now we're doing live classes, because that's how we can do it safely. But we're really hopeful by next spring that we'll be able to open our doors, cautiously but safely, to people to come and take hands-on workshops, and people to apply to be apprentices, where you come and you stay for longer than a workshop and help me work and things like that. But it'll all be free. It won't cost you a dime. Okay. Let's see. Boho Rustica asked about using nut oils. A lot of nut oils tend to be rancid. So I would just really, really look into like the type of nut oil, research how often, like how they're processing it. Are they having to, look into how they're processing the nut oil. Like, is it fresh pressed? Are they stripping it of smell? Are they using chemicals? But most nut oils go rancid pretty quickly. Let's see. Let's see. I'm looking for oil infusion questions. I see all of your tincture questions and stuff, and I'm not ignoring them I am ignoring them on purpose, because I'm trying to keep my magpie brain sticking to just oil stuff. Okay, Smiling Basil says, what about hair oil? What's the best hair oil? Which plant ally should I infuse for having healthy hair? Thanks so much for all of your wisdom. So I really, really recommend almond oil for hair, because it's really light and it goes for all hair types. And a lot of people, I don't think, realize that people know there's different hair types, but like if you have like seriously curly hair, like it's not going to react the same to if you don't have curly hair, right? Like, and so I really like to work with almond oil, because she crosses all hair types. She crosses all levels of curly to all levels of like flat on your head. And a little goes a long way, and she's really good at stimulating like follicle. But I'll have you look into what herbs would be good for a hair oil, because I want you to get curious, and I want you to be the one who's deciding why you're choosing to use that herb. Because if I just hand you that information, you'll just do it without knowing why, and I want you to know the why behind it. Okay, so let's see. Julia Flenor asked, best place to buy herbal supplies. There's a lot of places online. There's some well-known ones like Mountain Rose Herb, Frontier Herbals, Star West Botanicals. San Francisco Herb Co. has been one that I've been really enjoying lately, just because they're not backlogged like other places. But really what it comes down to is asking where they source from, like do they have organic options? Are all of their herbs imported from Croatia? Which there's nothing wrong with that, but then if they did, are they using radiation to like meet the FDA standards of like when they import something? Like, there's a lot of things to ask these herbal companies, and if they're a good company, they should have all this information like on their website. They should have the information under the listing. They should have the information on a fax or a common questions. They should be willing to disclose that to you too. If you ask a person where they get their herbs from, like a company, and they won't answer you like what country of origin it came from, walk away. I would avoid, and this isn't anything personal, but like I try to avoid getting any herbs that come from China and or India. In China, there's a lot of problems with like contamination and radiation. In India, they have basically like open sewer systems. So what happens is these flies in the millions land all over all the herbs that they're typically drying outside or the crops, and you can get pretty sick from that, like cross contamination, because they're landing in people's sewage and then going onto these plants. And there's also limited regulations in those places of like how they can treat these plants and like how they can water them with sewage. And so it's just really important to know the source. Okay, let's see. Youthful Nectar Soap asked, I have dried witch hazel, how would you use it? I like to use dried witch hazel in an oil infusion. You could also make a water infusion, but then that's going to go bad pretty quick, you know. But you could also get tricky and infuse your witch hazel into witch hazel, or, you know, to make it shelf stable. But, okay, let's see. Oh, it keeps kicking me back down. Let me jump all the way to the bottom. Samantha Lockhart asks, what are thoughts on drinking oil infusions for leaky gut? I wouldn't do it. I mean, I would say healthy animal fats and healthy fats are really good for healing your gut health, but that's more of a, like, you're incorporating them into your foods, or you're making bone broth. If you just start taking shots of oil, odds are good you're going to be in the bathroom for a while, right? Because it's just going to slip right through you. But if you start adding more oils to the things you cook, and you start, you know, drinking more like really like nice fat saturated broths, and you start looking for like higher fat content and things, and healthy fats is key here, that would probably help versus just drinking an oil infusion. That'd probably fuck your day up. Let's see, let me scroll back up, and let's see. Best oil to cook with is what Maria G asked. And it's kind of, you can make, okay, so I'll keep it in the subject of what we're talking about by being tricky. You can make herbal infused oils to cook with. You can take thyme, rosemary, sages, well, garden sages, which actually aren't related to sage, they're in the mint family, but you can also use garlic and dried onion and do all these things with dried stuff and infuse these oils, and then use these oils in your cooking pan, right? And it'll get flavor in there. I like to use avocado oil personally, but mainly I'm cooking with tallow, or I'm cooking with lard, or I'm cooking with chicken fat or goose fat, and I'm just making sure that I'm getting all these healthy fats into my body. Coconut oil is another good one. Make sure it comes from a high quality place, and that's a really good fat too. Let's see. If you can't use heat, how long should you let it sit? I would let it sit for at least like no less than 2 months, so 8 weeks if you can't use heat, and even then maybe longer. You know, like, you can just keep checking it how dark it is. And you can also get tricky where you take the herbs out of it like after like 4 weeks and give it fresh herbs again. You can kind of like cheat a little bit that way if you can't use any source of heat. But you know, if you're living somewhere that you have access to a refrigerator or a water heater, you've got a little bit of radiant heat accessible to you. You can just sit that oil on top of your fridge, or your water heater. Okay. So let's see. I can't pronounce your name. I'm sorry. Haven. I'm sorry. I'm all dysgraphic and tired. I'm like, I can't pronounce that. Said, could humidity in the air get in during the straining process? You know, if you're really leaving it for like more than a day or so, maybe. But you'd have to be at like, if you're at like somewhere where it's like 100% humidity, first of all, my condolences. I'm so sorry. I'm from high mountain desert, and when it gets like 60, 70% humidity here, I'm like, I'm gonna die. it's all encompassing and I'm suffocating. So I couldn't imagine living somewhere where it's 100% humidity. But if you do, after a day or two, I wouldn't imagine, unless you've got like a situation where like you're actively seeing condensation like building. But maybe even like covering it with like a towel, or like paper towels would probably be good because it would like maybe grab the moisture but like let air go through. But it shouldn't. Let's see. Fresh rose petal use. I mean, you can make a tincture out of them, but so one thing other than St. John's wort that I really don't like to use for infused oils is fresh flowers, because they're basically like 90% water content. Like when you touch it, it's water, it's wet, it's all just moisture. So drying them is really important. Sarah B asks, "Hey April, sorry if it's already been asked, but what should we look for when purchasing tallow? Once we get it, is there anything we need to do before using it?" So when you're looking to purchase tallow, ask them where they're sourcing it from. Is it grass fed? And because people are fucking liars, ask them how, is it really grass fed? Like, I want you to show me something that you're getting it from grass fed, especially if the tallow isn't yellow. Don't tell them that don't tell them it should be yellow because they might dye it. But ask them where they're sourcing it from, where the animals are coming from. Look for small farms that are producing it. A lot of people don't realize that there are small farmers out there everywhere in this country and everywhere in the world that are desperate for you to find them. They have a hard time advertising. They have a hard time because of the algorithm, especially right now because Facebook and stuff is a huge amount of their stocks is owned by PETA. So farming pages and farming resources are being shut down like crazy, so they have no outlet. So finding a place I think there's a place called findafarm.org or something like that. You can find farm locators to find farmers in your area and ask them if they have tallow. Ask them if they have this beef fat laying around, or if they've got this lard laying around, and if they're grass fed, and you want to support them, because then you're not just supporting making sure that you're a small farmer, you're also supporting the ethical treatment of animals. When we don't support small farms, they go under, and big ag doesn't care if you decide to become vegan. They just get bigger and bigger and bigger, and they know you buy their vegetables anyways. So they get their money from you one way or another. But when we support small farmers, we're supporting our local community, and we're also supporting the ethical treatment of animals. And so that's a really good place to look for tallow. Let's see. Patricia asks, I have heard that people use apricot kernel oil. Is this a good option for oil infusion? It comes down to if you read about it and you do a little bit of studying on apricot kernel oil, and you feel like it would be a good match for what you're trying to create in your own skin, then it's a good match for you. She's a bit expensive. She's definitely up there in the more expensive oils. So if I was to use her, I would probably do so after a little bit of experimenting, maybe with cheaper oils, and use her in small amounts. That way you can also combine these oils. You can say, oh, I like, avocado oil, I'm not biased at all towards that, and I like, apricot oil. You can combine these oils. So you can almost, with those more expensive oils like jojoba and apricot and things like that, what people tend to do is they add an amount of it to the oil that they're primarily working with. You can make your own oil blend even. You can say, I like this one for this, and this one for this, and this one for this, and I'm going to combine them all together, and then use that for your oil infusion. Okay, let's see. Okay, I'm trying to find questions. I think I've gone through a lot of questions here. I think I've... Oh, this was kind of a good one. Denise Skoll says, question, do you have an herbal foraging identification book recommendation, even though it's not to do with oils? Yes. I want you to buy any books that are about your area. I want you to find books for your unique state, for your unique county, for your unique bioregion. You can get a hold of your agricultural extension department. You definitely have one of those. Even if you live in a city, find the closest one and ask them for their weed documentation information. And I don't mean like marijuana. I mean like you can get these little field guides that are meant for farmers, and they're typically free or like maybe $5, where they're helping these farmers like identify all these noxious weeds. And while some of them will definitely be poisonous, these books are meant to help you identify plants. And because these are noxious weeds that escape everywhere, they're probably going to be growing around you. So you can get plant identification that way. You can hop online and like Google, like I live in like the Blue Mountain Range of Northeast Oregon. So I can Google plant identification books for Northeast Oregon, Blue Mountain Range, High Mountain Desert, you know, and you can Google all these things that even down to like your specific region. I found one for my area that is from the Forest Service. And it's a complete guide that the Forest Service compiled like in the 90s or 80s of like all the native plants that are in the entire, like for the most part, it probably needs to be updated. There's probably some they missed in the Blue Mountain region of Oregon. And it was such a cool find. Odds are good your Forest Service that's near you, maybe even the BLM land, resources and offices will have something compiled like that, because they have all these people out here researching this, watching the land, paying attention, being forest stewards, and just making sure that everything's like up and going and documenting this stuff. So usually when people ask me about what's the best identification book, and the answer always is the one that has to do with your area. And then once you identify a plant, you're like, instead of looking, here's a tip. Instead of looking through the book and then trying to find a plant within the book, go out and find the plant and try to find that plant within your book. And you'll learn about her, and then you can hop online and be like, is this medicinal? Is this something I can use? Or is this a plant that doesn't want me to interact with her? And what I mean by that is if a plant is poisonous, if a plant will hurt you either used topically or internally, she has no interest in having a relationship with you. She's not here to be a friend with you. She wants to be left alone. She's doing her own thing. Plants that want to have relationships with us are the ones that nourish us and can help heal us, and they want to have this reciprocal relationship with us. So that is that. Let me see. Let me jump back down and see if there's... if the dried herb sits on top of the oil when infusing, is that okay? Generally, you want to make sure that your herb is mixed in. You should be able to mix it in. It should be able to saturate. And then if not, I mean, it can float to the top, but it needs to not be dry on the top. It needs to be completely submerged to an extent and at least soaking in. And it generally is not going to cause it to mold, but like you want it to be really in the oil. Let's see. Question, would you heat rosemary infused almond oil? Absolutely, especially if you're using dried plant matter. It really, really needs that heat. Oil for dry skin, look for something that's got a high fat content, and this will be about jumping back into your individual research on which oil you want to use, and then you can see which one has a higher fat profile, because it's those fats that are really going to help nourish your... and what's really funny is there's two different types of dry skin. Dry skin can be greasy, and dry skin can be dry. So, okay, you know what? I've been here for 2.5 hours, so I think I've probably covered just about as much as I can. So there is probably a lot of stuff that I've missed. Forgive me for that, and thank you for letting me be human. But I'm really grateful that y'all came here with me, and thank you for those of you who have stuck around for 2.5 hours. I mean, good job. Good job. And I really look forward to expanding into this with you all, and doing more of these live classes. And I know that we're getting into winter, so it's going to have to be a lot of things. Like next I'm going to show you how to make a salve or a balm out of your oil infusions, and then after that I might show you how to make an electuary and all these things. And eventually, hopefully, the idea is next spring things will be safe enough for people to come here and take classes, right? Take classes with me for free. And even if you can't come, we're still going to be broadcasting these classes live. That way you can watch, and we'll save them for reference for people to watch. And we're just trying to get all this information out there that we can. I want to get at least 1 or 2 more classes done during the month of October, which is when I'm recording this. And then in November, I'll be too busy to do classes, and then December I need to rest. But I might throw a class or so in December, and then just kind of like just start rolling. And I want you all to know that I am slowly, very slowly, working on a self-guided herbalism course that will be free. I'm hopeful that will come out in spring, and I'm just trying to like really shift gears into like giving out more and more and more and more and more and more and more information as energy allows. And the most important thing that you all need to know, the most important thing that you need to take away from this video today, this live class, that I want you to know, no matter what, you are absolutely smart enough to do this. And even if you're intimidated, that's okay. Just try anyways. Don't be afraid to fail, because not only are you smart enough to do this, you're smart enough to learn from something that went wrong, right? And you do not need to pay somebody thousands of dollars to learn how to do this. You do not need to pay all this money to help you retain knowledge. It doesn't work that way. Money exchange is not how you remember things. You don't need to pay to validate your knowledge. You know this. You learn it. You learn by doing. Don't be afraid. Just jump right in. That probably could have come out of me smoother, but it's 2.5 hours of talking. But really, I mean, my most important message is, at the end of this, my goal is that you don't need me. You don't need me anymore. You know, like, and I know that sounded all sad and shit, but I mean, like, eventually you'll learn this and you'll be on your own, and you can take this knowledge back into your own hands, and you can pass it to other people, and we can kind of just start eroding away at, you know, Western herbalism systems that likes to put up paywalls and payment gateways and holds knowledge hostage for profit, which really helps hold people back and make people think that they really can't do this if they're not financially privileged. And my whole goal in life is to not pass out on a live video and make sure that you have the knowledge you need to take care of yourself. So, if you like my live class, I will be saving this as a video. I don't want any payment from you, but I am super grateful if you share my live class, if you share my posts, if you share my mission, if you help people learn about me. That way they can learn that they're smart enough too, and just help get this knowledge pushed out there into the world. So, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time, okay? Bye.